Chapter 12:57. Gods were lofty and mighty beings. Compared to mortals, only their bodies were immortal and their souls were indestructible. They could be said to be super life forms that could live forever. However, the troubles and pain that gods had were 1,000,000 times greater than that of mortals. Just like how humans had friends and enemies, the high and mighty gods also had their enemies. And their enemy was naturally another terrifying god. Mortals who lost their battles would lose their homes, their loved ones, and they would die miserable deaths. But if gods lost their battles, their fates would be 1,000,000 times more miserable than humans. Those who could become gods had immortal bodies and indestructible souls. Once they fell into the hands of their enemies, they would be tortured for tens of thousands of years. Thus, in order to avoid this tragic fate, many gods would choose to destroy their own divine kingdoms when they faced an unavoidable defeat. Their bodies would collapse, and their divine souls would self-destruct. In short, they would never let a single bit of themselves fall into the hands of their enemies. However, those who were unwilling to fail would choose to exile themselves. Before they completely failed, they would push their divine kingdoms into the void turbulence to avoid being hunted down by their enemies. As for the believers left behind in the source plane, they had no choice but to abandon them, allowing their enemies to carry out a bloody massacre. Without believers and a source of faith, the failed gods naturally lost the ability to continue maintaining their divine kingdoms. At this time, they would use the divine force crystals they had previously stored up to barely maintain the lowest level of operation in their divine kingdoms. Meanwhile, they would choose eternal sleep to reduce the consumption of divine force in their divine kingdoms. Thus, the divine kingdoms that had once been filled with believers and saints became deathly silent and lifeless. The divine kingdoms that used to be sacred and glorious became a lonely and desolate graveyard of the gods. Most of these gods who chose to exile themselves would have one of two outcomes. One, the hidden believers they had left behind in the source plane would grow stronger and gather a group of devout believers, pulling back the divine kingdoms that had fallen into the depths of the void. Two, all the believers would be killed by their enemies, completely cutting off their source of faith. This way, when the divine force crystals in their divine kingdoms were completely used up, their divine kingdoms would collapse, and their divine bodies and divine souls would sink into eternal oblivion. For some of the once glorious and great gods, the amount of divine force crystals they had stored up in their divine kingdoms was enormous. This also meant that from their self-exile to the complete collapse of their divine kingdom, this process could be as long as tens of thousands of years. However, even if they chose to go into self-exile, it did not mean that they would be absolutely safe. A lone paradise floating in the middle of a space storm in the depths of the Sea of Stars was a delicious meal for the predators from other dimensions. Of course, it could also be a terrifying death trap. If the predators arrived at just the right time, when the power of the exiled god was at its weakest, they would naturally be able to seize enormous benefits and top-notch resources that were unimaginable to outsiders. A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Even if the gods were in dire straits, they could still find a few powerful divine weapons after searching the entire divine kingdom. For most predators, obtaining one of these treasures was already worth the price of the ticket. However, if the predators were unlucky and the exiled gods still had some strength to spare, or if they ran into traps that were specifically designed to lure the champions of the other planes to their deaths, it would be hard to tell who would be the unlucky ones. Therefore, to be able to find a broken divine kingdom drifting aimlessly in the depths of the boundless sea of stars was already a blessing from the heavens. If one were to count on a dying god lying in that divine kingdom, waiting for them to slit their own throats, the possibility of that was simply too low. Therefore, the discovery of any ancient god's ruins meant a huge risk. Either it had been raided countless times by predators, and not a single hair was left inside, or some crazy god had released false information to lure those greedy beings inside and slaughter them. Therefore, when Grimm heard about the cemetery of death of an ancient god from Obiola, although he was tempted, he did not show it. Right now, his path to grade 5 was already smooth. As long as he continued to walk step by step, it would only be a matter of time before he crossed the limits of the planes and became an immortal great wizard. Under such circumstances, venturing into some ancient god's ruins or cemetery of death was simply asking for trouble. To be honest, if there were really such benefits, Grimm would rather explore them after reaching grade 5. Anyway, with his speed of advancement, it would only take him 300 to 400 years. For an ancient god's ruins, this amount of time was but a snap of the fingers. A little later would not affect anything. Besides, Obiola was an elder of the Wizard Association. It was impossible for him to bypass the Wizard Association and leak the information to Grimm alone. This also meant that the Wizard Association would definitely organize a group of people to conduct an in-depth investigation of this ancient god's ruins. If he got involved, he would definitely run into the Wizard Association's team. At that time, they would all serve their own masters, and it was inevitable that a conflict would break out. As if seeing Grimm's worries, Obiola said in a low voice, "Don't worry. Regarding this ancient god's ruins, the Wizard Association will definitely not interfere." Why? Grimm didn't seem to care. Ha ha ha. Only you wizards outside the association would have such questions. Obiola replied with a proud look. The ancient ruins, ancient gods' relics, cemetery of death, secret realms, and so on that have accumulated in our Sorcerer Association's hands are simply too many to count. With so many grade 4 wizards in the association, it would take a lot of effort and time to investigate these clues one by one and find the real treasure. So, our association is currently concentrating on exploring those places that are easier to get. As for this kind of ambiguous ancient gods' ruins, we can't spare manpower to search and explore it for the time being. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken it out to trade with you. Grimm could not help but frown and think, how can I be sure that the information you gave me is true? Obiola smirked. I heard that you have a close relationship with a witch in the north. Can't she tell whether the clues I gave you are true or not? Besides, do you think Obiola, am the kind of guy who comes out with fake information to cheat people? Seeing that Grimm was somewhat tempted, Obiola took out a broken magic ring and threw it to Grimm, saying, "This is a magic ring I collected in the Outer Realm. The seller has indicated that it came from a certain ancient god's ruins. You can look for the Witch of Destiny to verify it. If you're interested, then trade with me. I'll use the clues to the whereabouts of the ancient god's ruins to exchange for your divine egg. That shouldn't be a problem, right?" Having said that, Obiola did not say anything else and left Grimm's residence. Grimm looked at the figure of the other party as he slowly stroked the oddly shaped and damaged magical ring. His heart could not help but pound wildly. It would be a lie to say that he was not tempted at all. Any random, powerful ancient god would be a terrifying existence above the 5th rank. The fact that the ancient god's ruins could drift in the nether storm for so long was a testament to how terrifying and powerful they were when they were alive. No one would doubt such a fellow, even if he said he was a grade 6 or 7 ancient god. If he could rob the ancient god's divine kingdom, Grimm would not have to worry about resources and treasures for the next 1,000 years. Not only would he be able to make a fortune, but the Crimson family would also benefit from it, obtaining many top-grade resources. Grimm's development path might be smooth, but he still had to consider Mary and Alice. Unknowingly, Grimm had contacted Alice, who was far away in the northern lands. After a simple conversation, Grimm tore open a spatial crack and sent the magic ring to Alice. A moment later, Alice's figure appeared in a magic mirror. Do you want to hear the good news or the bad news? Hearing Alice's words, Grimm already had an answer in his heart. The good news is that the ancient god's ruins are real. The bad news is that you're probably going to say that it's a trap set by our old enemy, Medusa. Grimm sighed. Looks like you already know what to do. A sweet smile appeared on Alice's elegant face. To be honest, Medusa did a very clean job on this matter. I can only confirm that this ring is related to a god of death, but I can't find any traces of Medusa's involvement. However, for this information to fall into your hands so cleverly, It seems to be in line with Medusa's style. Since you've already guessed it, tell me, what do you plan to do? Refuse Obiola's offer? Refuse? Why would I refuse? Grimm suddenly chuckled. If this is really a trap concocted by Medusa, then in order to avoid our suspicions, the matter of the ancient god's ruins is very likely true, and there really is a god who has not fallen yet in there, but this is obviously a trap arranged by Medusa. If we really follow the traces, I'm afraid we'll inevitably fall into a trap. What if we're not the ones going? Seeing that Alice's eyes were wide open in shock, Grimm leisurely smiled and said, I'm relieved that we've exchanged letters. You don't have to worry about the rest. I'll take care of it. Are you really going to make a deal with Obiola? How can I not agree to something that's meaningful to us? Don't worry, I'm not stupid enough to step into that trap. I'll carefully choose a few scapegoats. Chapter 12:58. 3 months later. In the sea of ashes that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, Grimm once again met the extremely powerful Lord of Flames, Gromus. The moment he took out the divine stone of light from his robes, the entire flame palace erupted into a frenzy. The flame of law on Grimm's body surged violently. 2 eye-catching blue flames shot out from the eyes of the humanoid flame like fireworks during a festival. Great. That's great. I knew you could be trusted. Now get it to me. Gromus stood up and shouted in a low, muffled voice. Facing the Flame Lord's outstretched hand, Grimm did not move an inch. Instead, a strange expression appeared on his face. My lord, have you forgotten something before you get the divine stone of light? Gromus, who was like a ball of fire, could not help but shake his head. You human wizards are never straightforward enough when it comes to making deals. What? Do you think we flame creatures will deceive people like you? With that, Grooms took out a fire crystal from his chest and tossed it to Grimm. He said loudly, This contains the method to refine the origin flame. Now, you can give me the divine rock of light. Grimm placed the flame crystal on his forehead and browsed through the information stored within. He nodded in satisfaction. He then loosened his right hand and allowed the Flame Lord to take the divine stone of light. All right, the deal is done. You can leave now. After both parties had gotten what they needed, Gromus was obviously eager to understand the effects of the divine stone of light. He almost could not wait to chase Grimm out of the sea of ashes. Grimm did not dare stay for long in such a troublesome place. He immediately opened a teleportation portal to the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda and disappeared on the spot. The reason why so many high-grade wizards like to build their own wizard tower could be seen from this. No matter which dimension they were in, as long as the other side did not isolate long-distance teleportation, they could use the Wizard's Pagoda's waymark to travel hundreds of millions of miles and return to their residences. However, such a method required profound witchcraft knowledge and powerful witchcraft methods to achieve it. It was an ability that only Tier 4 sorcerers possessed. After returning to the Wizard's Pagoda, the first thing Grimm did was run to the alternate dimension to retrieve the Holy Bible of Wisdom that he had just devoured. Seriously speaking, after it was completely devoured by the secret voodoo poison scroll, the Holy Bible of Wisdom no longer existed. In that space, there was a special witchcraft book, the Book of Filthy Darkness. It was a thick and frightening book. The cover was printed with the skin of a demonic dragon, and the edges were inlaid with sharp, fine gold pages. When he flipped the book open, the first thing he saw was a pale green wooden doll, and its body was covered with all kinds of strange magic patterns. Plague Poison Spirit Remy. As the secret scroll of voodoo evolved into the Book of Darkness, Remy became a summoned creature in the book. Grimm could still summon it at any time to fight for him on the battlefield. Moreover, as Grimm and the Book of Darkness improved, Remy's tier had also risen to Tier 4. After all, it was Grimm's soul equipment and was closely linked to his soul. There was no way it could exist independently in this world. Flipping to the second page, Grimm saw the old poisonous woman that Remy had turned into his slave. However, she was still at Tier 3 and had not risen like Remy's. As he flipped through the pages, Grimm helplessly discovered that the Book of Filthy Darkness should be called the Book of Plagues. From start to finish, it was filled with all kinds of strange plague creatures that Remy had collected and created. As Grimm flipped through the pages, the AI chip's prompt sounded out. Book of Filthy Darkness, a Tier 5 wizard weapon. Recorded in it are the God of Wisdom's views on dimensions, space, knowledge, and power. It also contains a large system of plague creatures. It is estimated that it will give the main body +5 spirit and increase the speed of comprehension and acceptance of knowledge. It will also give the main body additional professional knowledge, allowing the main body to break through the limits of elemental specialization and master other spells that are not higher than the main body's rank. This wizard weapon has a toxic halo, allowing the main body to master all poison element spells. Asterisk hiss. Hiss. Asterisk Grimm could not help but suck in a breath of cold air as he grabbed the Book of Filthy Darkness. Grimm had only been able to forcefully control the divine fire orb, and he had not been able to completely destroy the god of fire's imprint within. However, the Book of Filthy Darkness was completely different. Grimm's soul equipment from inside to outside was completely his. Hence, the Tier 5 Book of Darkness provided a frightening boost to Grimm's abilities. Putting everything else aside, just the +5 points of spiritual power was already shocking enough. It must be known that a peak Tier 4 wizard weapon could only give a maximum buff of 3 points to a single attribute. However, the Book of Filthy Darkness gave a buff of 5 points, and the buff was the most important attribute for elemental magi. With the buff from the Book of Filthy Darkness, Grimm's spiritual force instantly soared to 49 points. With this, he could now stand on equal footing with peak Tier 4 powerhouses. Of course, the buffs from external items could not represent Grimm's true strength. Grimm still had a long way to go before he could reach the peak of Tier 4. However, in a fight with others, the buff of 5 points of spiritual force would greatly increase his battle prowess. At the very least, if that which sadistic murder appeared before Grimm again, he could rely on his powerful individual strength to crush her. Aside from this, the Book of Filthy Darkness also gave Grimm a breakthrough in his elemental specialization. In the past, Grimm specialized in fire spells. Even though his attacks were extremely destructive, it was easy for enemies to target him. Now, with the Book of Filthy Darkness's buff, Grimm could transcend boundaries and control other magic elements. As long as he did not exceed Tier 2, he would not be limited by his elemental specialization. With so many elemental and fire spells combined to form a hybrid spell, Grimm's attacks would become more and more varied. On top of that, he also had the free toxic aura and the terrifying venom spell. Grimm's attacks would only be too many, not too few. As Grimm's soul equipment, the Book of Filthy Darkness also contained the Tier 4 Plague Poison Spirit Remy and his Plague Legion. If he released them, Grimm would instantly have an army of cannon fodder that would listen to his orders. From the various buffs and benefits, it could be seen that a Tier 5 magic tool could indeed suppress a Tier 4 magic tool in all aspects. Grimm carefully found a gold essence chain and tied the Book of Filthy Darkness to his waist. Coupled with the Vulcan's orb, Grimm, who had 2 rank 5 artifacts at the same time, would be invincible among the rank 4 sorcerers. Moreover, the suppression of a Tier 5 magic tool against a Tier 4 wizard could not be ignored. When Grimm fought a Tier 4 wizard, most of the fire spells he cast with the Blazing Coral Staff will be nullified by the opponent's force field and resistance. However, if he used the Divine Fire Orb, the damage would be much greater. This was the result of the suppression of magic tools. After carefully storing the Book of Filthy Darkness, Grimm calmed himself down and examined the fire crystal. Beep. Detected a new stream of data. Host can receive. Please indicate whether to accept. Accept. In the next moment, a stream of consciousness with a burning aura entered Grimm's mind, and he quickly accepted and absorbed it. Grimm's was not lying. This was indeed a special technique to refine the origin flame, which was also the flame of laws that Grimm had mentioned. Moreover, after Grimm had tempered the core of his consciousness in the Wizard Association His understanding and control of the fire of laws had improved. He could now put this technique into practice. This was something that other Tier 4 sorcerers could never hope to achieve. According to the past fire wizards' advancement process, most of them would be busy collecting origin substances, comprehending the law of fire, and refining the core of their consciousness. As for the fire of laws, they would have to wait until they had gathered multiple laws of fire and raised their mental strength to the limit of 49 points. Then, they would have to use a special ceremony to fuse all the laws of fire into one. Only then would they be able to form their own fire of laws. Only after reaching Tier 5 could they use the flames of laws to radiate their bodies, allowing them to adapt to the intensity of the fire of laws. Then, they would have to spend hundreds of years to slowly modify their bodies and the fire of laws. And now, Grimm was using the authority of a Tier 5 sorcerer as a Tier 4 sorcerer. The hidden benefits this would bring him were naturally innumerable. Truth be told, if Grimm could refine his own law of fire in advance, with the help of 2 rank 5 magus equipment, he would basically become a rank 5 magus in the skin of a rank 4 magus. In a group of Tier 4 magi, this kind of strength was the difference between a wolf and a sheep. However, with Grimm's current strength, refining the fire of laws was still a little too hasty. After all, his core of consciousness had just undergone a breakthrough, and it would not be able to withstand too much pressure in a short period of time. Hence, Grimm once again fell silent in the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, quietly waiting for his core of consciousness to recover. And this wait lasted for 5 years. One day, the strange bone finger in Grimm's hand that he had been waiting for a long time finally rang again. Inside the secret chamber, Grimm took out the phalanx that was emitting a thick death chi. He could not help but frown. This was the communication token that the Lich had given him. Chapter 1259. It was a lonely space in the depths of the void. The dark and serene sea of stars flickered continuously in the horizon, and every beautiful and resplendent star represented a healthy and perfect plane world. Due to the distance, they shrunk to an almost undetectable speck of light in the pitch-black sky. But in the eyes of those beings who stepped out of the plane for the first time, these twinkling stars seemed so close, as if they could reach out and grab them. But in fact, this was just an illusion. Even the star closest to them was billions of miles away. If those beings were mesmerized by the beauty of the stars and tried to get close, they would find to their horror that they wouldn't be able to get close even if they flew for 8 to 10 years. So close yet so far. The vastness and majesty of the sea of stars wasn't something beings of other planes could understand. The void was not empty. Most of the void looked empty on the surface, as if there was nothing inside. But only those who experienced it could truly understand the true meaning of the void was not empty. The void wasn't empty. It was filled with the undulating tides of energy. Sometimes they converged and sometimes they dispersed, forming a magnificent ocean of energy. But ordinary beings of other planes didn't have the right to appreciate or get close to such a scene. Under the constant erosion and grinding of the energy tides, matter that lacked the protection of energy systems would be broken down, reduced to tiny elemental particles that were hard to see with the naked eye and fuse back into the void. However, at this moment, there was a huge meteorite with a radius of about 100 meters tumbling and drifting in the void. The meteor's surface collided with the energy tides everywhere, causing sparks and clouds to fly everywhere. The surging energy tide was like a greedy beast, constantly scouring and grinding this huge meteorite. From time to time, it would tear off some grayish-black powder from the meteorite, sprinkling it into the depths of the void where people couldn't see it. If nothing unexpected happened, this continental fragment that had drifted out of some broken plane would be devoured by the void storm in 3 to 5 years. Not even the last bit of residue would be left. But now, it had become a foothold for some strange life forms. The Lich Khan genus stood quietly on a rather flat spot on the surface of the boulder, shrouded in a deathly aura. Under its feet, A small glyph array with a radius of 5 meters was flashing as it operated, transmitting some kind of strange fluctuation that was hard for outsiders to detect. It had been waiting here for a year, and from the looks of it, it seemed like it could wait indefinitely. Of course, its wait was not in vain. Finally, as the energy tide trembled slightly, a tiny light spot in the dark sky was getting closer and closer to the foothold that was floating in the depths of the sea of stars. Moments later, the fiery clouds on the surface of the meteorite parted, and a strange creature with a particularly strong physique charged into the meteorite. It was a strange creature that resembled a scorpion. Its body was 5 meters long, and the surface of its body was covered with a layer of light golden-hard carapace. Its body was divided into 3 parts: front, middle, and back. The torso in the middle was the longest and narrowest, surrounded by 4 pairs of sharp limbs that shone with a metallic luster. The head at the front was short and nimble, and a pair of terrifying pincers protruded from both sides of the head. Behind him was a terrifying scorpion tail with distinct joints. The stinger at the end of the tail, which was more than half a meter long, was pitch black and faintly emitted an unpleasant and bitter smell. Arriving from the void, the surface of its body propped up an earthy yellow light barrier, protecting itself within, preventing it from being eroded by the omnipresent energy tide. The moment it entered, the strange scorpion stared at the lich Khan genus with its green compound eyes. The latter did not seem surprised by its arrival, and instead began to communicate with it lazily. "You're early, Sand King. Those fellows aren't here yet. You should rest here for now. Khan genus, I hope the ones you invited this time are strong. Otherwise, that ice dragon won't be easy to deal with." The Sand King replied telepathically. "Don't worry. The ones I invited this time are all elites that have been carefully selected. Nothing will go wrong." Congenus's condensed soul fire shrunk into the shape of a golden cross and projected it through the 2 large rubies. Its spiritual power was truly astounding. As the one who initiated the mission, it naturally had the authority to do so. Thus, after hearing the lich's guarantee, the scorpion did not say anything else. It waddled its body to a corner of the meteorite and lay down on the steel-like ground to close its eyes to recover. Those that could travel through the endless sea of stars and the void storms to reach this place were no pushovers. Even this unassuming scorpion had the power of a grade 4 being within its body. With its powerful physique and sturdy shell, it would not lose much energy even if it traveled tens of thousands of kilometers through the void storms. However, in this empty, temporary foothold, there was nothing else it could do other than close its eyes and rest. The arrival of the scorpion was just the beginning. In the next half a year, 2 more powerful existences came in one after another. After communicating with the lich, they settled down to rest. Up until now, the small meteorite that was less than 100 meters wide had already accommodated 4 powerful existences from different planes. They each occupied a corner, waiting and communicating in silence, as if they didn't care about the passing of time. Finally, another 2 months passed, and no one else came. The unusual Scorpion Sand King, who had arrived the earliest, could no longer hold back. "Ahem, Khan genus, are the people you called coming or not? If no one comes, then we should discuss what to do next. Don't rush. That person will definitely come. Plus, his power will be of great help to our mission. So, how arrogant of him to make me wait for so long. I'll see which plane he comes from later. Look, he's here, just as we're talking." As Kongna's shrill, mental whisper echoed in the narrow space, a dazzling ball of fire ignited in the distance. With a deafening roar, the flame flickered as it rapidly approached. In the blink of an eye, the fire in the center of the meteorite soared into the sky. A strange humanoid figure that was only 2 meters tall appeared. A moment later, the fire dissipated, and the figure of the strange visitor was revealed. The last arrival was actually a human. The newcomer was wearing a set of strange black dragonskin soft armor and a dark cloak. The hood covered most of his face, revealing only a sharp white chin and 2 strands of dark red hair on his temples. He was only 2 meters tall, neither fat nor skinny. Such a height might be considered as a big guy among humans, but in this strange gathering, he became an out-and-out nobody. Even the Lich Congenus was 3 meters tall. The others were even bigger, their bodies imposing and intimidating. The human magus held a strange scarlet staff in his hand. There was an ordinary-looking magic orb embedded in the top of the staff. A thick book hung from his waist with a silver chain. The edges of the book were inlaid with gold and silver. It seemed like it could be used to smash people. The newcomer was young and handsome. However, everyone present was an old freak who had lived for centuries. Naturally, they would not judge him based on his appearance and think that he was a rookie magus. When Congenus saw the human magus, his scarlet soul fire circled around his body. When his gaze fell on the thick book beside him, his soul flame suddenly shrank, and his spiritual energy fluctuated a little. Is this the Book of Wisdom? But this aura doesn't seem right. Does this fire magus have a second powerful book-type support tool? The abilities and equipment of any individual were a part of their strength. They were secrets that outsiders could not afford to pry into. Even though Congenus had his suspicions, he could not probe further. All he could do was stand up and greet the newcomer nonchalantly. "You're finally here." The young human magus was Grim, who had rushed over from thousands of miles away after receiving the news. Of all the beings present, he only knew Congenus. He nodded with a smile. "My realm is a little far from here, so it took me quite some time to get here. It's good that you're here. It's good that you're here. Time, in the eyes of us people, what is it?" As he spoke politely, Congenus sensed the energy emanating from Grim without batting an eyelid. "It hasn't even been 100 years, and this fellow I didn't pay much attention to has already become a mid-grade 4 magus." Even someone as experienced and knowledgeable as the Lich could not help but be shocked by such a terrifying rate of growth. Seeing that the Lich, who had always been cold and arrogant, was so enthusiastic, the three of them could not help but look at each other. They all shifted their attention to the human wizard who had just arrived. "Hey, late one. I'm the Sand King. What's your name?" The hot-tempered Sand King could not help but speak first. Sand King was just a nickname for the Sand King. No one cared about its real name. Chapter 1260. "You can call me Fireman," Grim said calmly as he glanced at the strangely shaped scorpion. In a team that was completely unfamiliar with each other, keeping a low profile might save him from some unnecessary trouble, but would also lower his evaluation in the eyes of his other partners. Once a fellow was deemed as a weakling by the others, what awaited him would be a lot of hard work, and his own interests would be infringed upon. Those who could become friends with a Lich were not good people. Of course, they would be bullied if they were weaker. This kind of thing could not be avoided no matter where they went. Therefore, although Grim was keeping a low profile, his attitude was unprecedentedly tough. "Fireman? I've never heard of this name. Why, have you two heard of this name?" The Sand King's last question was directed at the two big guys who were standing quietly by the side. To be honest, Grim had long been afraid of these two strange fellows. Judging from their appearance, the first one should be the famous Medusa. Medusas were creatures that only had females and no males. As for how they reproduced, it was not something Grim knew. This was a strange Medusa that was tall, yet had a perfect blend of strength and elegance. She stood tall and straight. Her upper body was in the shape of a beautiful human woman with exquisite curves. Her naked body was covered with a layer of indigo-colored sharp scales, densely packed and stacked on top of each other. The two bulging bulges on his chest were so majestic and huge that it looked like 2 footballs were stuffed under his scales. Furthermore, they swayed slightly with every movement she made, which was very eye-catching. Her 6 arms that were also covered in fine scales were holding different types of weapons and defensive equipment. They glowed with magic, and one could tell that they were special magical weapons at first glance. She dragged a 10-meter-long snake tail behind her, which was able to support her body as she slithered across the rugged ground. As for her sharp cheeks, they were in line with the aesthetics of humans, making her look very beautiful and charming. However, those long and narrow pupils, her bright purple lips, and her head of wriggling snake hair. All of these clearly showed how terrifying and cruel she was. Although Grimm had Medusa among his subordinates, this was his first time seeing a Tier 4 intermediate Medusa. Such a monster was capable of both close and long-range attacks. It also had a powerful petrification Esper ability. It was also an exceptionally difficult magical creature to deal with. Not far from her, there was a strange existence standing upright. Seriously speaking, the fourth guy was a huge and hazy blue light. Amidst the dense blue light, one could vaguely see the outline of a strange bone model outlined by the starry white light spots. It looked like a human, but not a human, like a beast, but not a beast. It was extremely strange. A star spirit. This was a star spirit from the spirit realm. Grimm was screaming in his mind. Damn it, I didn't see this special creature exclusive to the spirit realm the last time I came here. I didn't expect to encounter it in the boundless depths of the star sea. This kind of star spirit was a special life form. They did not have flesh and blood, nor did they have a torso. They only had a strange body filled with psionic energy. They could convert any kind of magical energy into strange psionic energy and use it to cast powerful secret psionic spells. As psionic energy and most supernatural abilities did not belong to the same energy system, normal creatures had no way of defending against psionic energy. According to the records of some magi who had come into contact with psionic energy, elemental spells were not very effective in defending against it. Instead, pure energy shields were more effective. Some magi had analyzed it and believed that psionic energy was a strange power formed from the combination of psionic force and pure energy. The only way to kill a star spirit was to destroy the psionic shell around their body and the psionic core that contained their souls. However, it was easier said than done. A powerful star spirit was much more difficult to deal with than a spellcaster of the same rank. That was why Grimm was unwilling to make an enemy out of a star spirit unless absolutely necessary. Sand King, enough with the nonsense. The seductive Medusa swam over. He was invited by Congress. Don't you trust his judgment? The Sand King waved the two pairs of pincers in front of him. The Lich loves to fight. It will only pull in newcomers it can't take down. Looks like this flaming man has some tricks up his sleeves. All right, since everyone is here, Congress, tell us about the mission. If anyone doesn't want to participate, please leave as soon as possible. Don't be a burden when the time comes. The star spirit took a step forward and used a strange mental language to shake the void. Grimm's eyes narrowed under the shadow of his hood. Blue light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Beep. Strange magical energy detected. Unable to be categorized into current magic system. Host, please name this magical energy. Psionic energy. Beep. A new energy system has been established. Name, psionic energy. This energy is a combination of powerful psionic force and pure void energy. It has the powerful ability of ability empowerment and spiritual injection. Ability empowerment. What kind of ability is that? Beep. Psionic energy is a special type of mental energy. It is a manifestation of the materialization of psionic force. According to the level of psionic energy, it can be represented by red, green, yellow, and blue. Red is the highest and blue is the lowest. This means that when the color of the psionic energy changes, it is a sign that its energy level has increased. Ability empowerment is a strange way of using psionic energy. Star spirits can attach psionic energy to the surface of matter at will to simulate some special magical effects. For example, explosion, decomposition, disturbance, binding. Just as Grimm was silently observing the star spirit and analyzing the strange psionic energy around it, the star spirit seemed to have sensed something. A pair of yellow lights lit up in the depths of the blue cloud and scanned Grimm from afar. The yellow light that represented the star spirit's power clashed with the red light that shot out from Grimm's eyes. An energy ripple visible to the naked eye swept out, and both sides could not help but take a step back, their expressions turning solemn at the same time. The pale blue energy cloud around Star Spirit's body began to change color, turning into a dense yellow color. This meant that the psionic energy in Star Spirit's body was increasing and was on the brink of battle. All right, enough is enough. Somonis, the Lich in charge, had no choice but to step forward. We're dealing with a grade 4 frost dragon. Save your energy and vent it on that fellow. With those cold words, one of the teeth hanging from Conganus's waist exploded. Then, a 10-meter-long, 1-meter-wide, 2-meter-high bone wall rose from the ground, separating Grim and Celestial from each other. The two glared at each other coldly. They had no intention of fighting and were only using this small conflict to show off their strength. While the energy ripple that exploded in the air wasn't strong, it was enough to show off their basic strength. The scorpion-like Sand King and the snake-haired Seshiana couldn't help but look at each other. They could feel the unsettling presence of laws from the energy ripple. All right, since everyone's here, I'll give you a brief introduction. Conganus's body floated half a meter above the ground, his scarlet soul fire coldly staring at the group. The Sand King comes from a strange plane called Dune Castle. It's the ruler there and rules a complete small plane. It's proficient in sand-type attacks. It's good at covering and attacking. Not to mention, its defense is the strongest among us. Nobody could refute that. Just looking at the Sand King's thick, pale golden shell alone was enough to tell how strong its defense was. Most insect-type creatures had strong vitality, which was something other races could only envy. Hee, don't flatter me, skeleton. You're putting me on a pedestal because you want me to be your meat shield, right? Let me make this clear. If there's equipment that I can use in that old dragon's lair, nobody's allowed to fight me for it. The Sand King's green compound eyes rolled as he warned through gritted teeth. Nobody's going to fight you for it. Conganus's white jawbone quivered, producing a crisp sound. The Lamia Seshiana walks the path of high agility. Me, Pyro, and Turaz are all spellcasters. If there's really that Earth's barrier, it'll definitely be yours. Only after getting the Lich's confirmation did the Sand King shut his mouth in satisfaction. The Lamia Seshiana comes from the Shadow Song Plain. She's a moderately powerful lord there, with close to 10,000 Lamias under her command. She's best at close-range combat and petrifying attacks. After hearing the Lich's introduction, the Lamia Seshiana nodded proudly without any intention of introducing herself. Taraz, the astral soul, hails from the soul realm. That's a powerful plane comparable to the Magus world. He's best at the mystical psionic energy. As for his abilities, Somonis paused, not knowing how to describe the strange psionic energy. There's no need to introduce Sir Taraz. I'm sure everyone here knows how powerful and strange a creature like the astral soul is. There's no need to waste your breath. Grim smiled. He could tell that this wasn't the first time they'd met. They seemed to have a tacit understanding of each other. He was probably the only newbie among them. Then, Lord Pyro, would you like to introduce yourself, or should I? Somonis asked coldly. I'll do it myself. Grim stepped forward. My name is Grim. You can call me Pyro. I come from the Magus world, where I have a small fiefdom in the middle of the continent. As for my forte, it's fire spells. I believe that's one of the reasons Lord Somonis invited me here. After the brief introduction, Grim immediately felt that the other people's vigilance was reduced a little. Chapter 1261. The World of Ice. This was a strange world that was completely different from other planes. The laws of the plane seemed to have been severely distorted here, transforming this small plane into a land of extreme cold covered in ice and snow. Cold winds howled, and snow filled the sky. As far as the eye could see, the entire world was grayish-white. Even the sky was covered by a thick layer of gloomy clouds, and not a single sun, moon, or star could be seen. Ice sheets that were dozens of meters thick could be seen everywhere on the ground, as well as towering ice peaks that rose from the ground and towered between heaven and earth. Although the temperature here was extremely low, it was not suitable for the survival of most creatures. However, as far as the eye could see, one could still sense the existence of many life forms in the vast, icy plains filled with snow and the intersecting glaciers of various sizes. They were all ice creatures with strange life forms, or even ice elementals of different shapes. In short, those that could survive in such a harsh environment had extremely high resistance to the cold. However, at that moment, a skeletal door filled with a strong, deathly aura opened silently above a huge snowy tundra. 5 strange figures of different heights and sizes walked out in a single file. The moment Grimm stepped out of the portal, he could feel the extreme cold coming from all directions. This was a plane that was extremely repulsive to him. From the illusory consciousness of the plane to the creatures that lived here, even the grass, trees, flowers, and fruits, even the cold wind that blew past him revealed extreme disgust towards him. When Grimm stepped on the tundra, the ice beneath his feet crunching loudly. Countless silver chains flowing with the power of laws extended from the surrounding void, binding him tightly. One end of these silver chains entered the void, while the other entered Grimm's body. Using the power of the plane's laws, they frantically suppressed Grimm's flame energy. Grimm's energy aura dropped rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, he had fallen from mid-grade 4 to early grade 2. If not for the frantic pulse of the heart of laws in his body, pumping out wave after wave of pure flame energy to resist the suppression of the plane's laws, Grimm's strength might have fallen to below grade 2. Without the energy to protect his body, the surrounding cold energy swarmed over, threatening to freeze him to death on the spot. The robe that was draped over his body instantly became cold and hard. A layer of crystal-clear blue frost instantly appeared on the edges of the black robe, and it began to spread rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Grimm could only feel the bone-chilling wind. His entire body, flesh, and bones were rapidly solidifying in the terrifying cold. At this moment, if not for his outstanding physique, he would not have been able to resist the invasion of the cold, and would have been frozen into a human-shaped ice sculpture. Humph, what a vicious show of strength! Grimm let out a muffled groan. He shook the flaming coral wand in his hand, and a strange stream of warmth flowed into his body, driving away all the coldness in his body. As Grimm waved his wand, the temperature within a radius of 5 meters began to rise again. Soon, the temperature returned to a comfortable level. However, this insignificant action of his had clearly triggered an even more ferocious retaliation from the laws of the dimension. More chains of laws reached out from the void, snaking towards Grimm. From the looks of it, it seemed like they were going to expel him from the dimension. The few who had entered the icy world with Grimm were not spared either. They were all suppressed by the laws of the dimension. They could not help it, as this was always the case when one invaded a different dimension. If they were just ordinary people, they would not have been able to enjoy the full suppression of the laws of the dimension. It was precisely because they were too powerful that their bodies and souls were almost all enveloped by the laws of the origin plane. Naturally, 2 different types of laws could not coexist. That was why they had triggered such a terrible suppression when they had entered a different dimension. However, even though their elemental powers were suppressed, they still had powerful physical bodies and terrifying racial abilities. Therefore, even though they were bound by the densely packed chains of laws, they could still move freely and still had strength to spare. Among the 5 of them, Grimm's physical strength was the weakest. Therefore, after the Lich, Lamia, Sand King, and Star familiarized themselves with the environment, they all focused their attention on Grimm's body, wanting to see how he would get rid of this annoying suppression. Of course, Grimm's performance had also surprised them. Due to the abuse of the laws of the dimension, the consciousness of the dimension had obviously placed a large portion of the backlash on Grimm. However, Grimm merely waved his staff, and a dense fiery cloud enveloped his body. The terrifying backlash from the plane disappeared just like that. It was as if it had never existed in the first place. Let's go. We are thousands of miles away from the nest of the frost dragon. Let's hurry up and go. Grimm looked relaxed as he held his staff and strode forward, as if he had not noticed what had just happened. The other four could not help but look at each other in confusion. "Bone, how did this guy resist the plane's bite just now?" asked the mysterious star soul. "Yes, his physique is definitely not as strong as mine. But if it were me, I would have suffered a little too. How did he resist it?" The voice was muffled. It was obviously the Desert King. "Don't ask too much. Everyone has their own secrets. If you don't want any trouble, you'd better watch your mouths," Lich Kingina's said coldly. However, before it left, it still coldly squeezed out a sentence from between its teeth. "Be careful, that guy has a supreme grade item." After saying that, he did not wait for the others to ask him anything. He floated up and chased after Grimm's figure against the biting cold wind. A supreme grade item. The few of them felt a chill in their hearts. When they looked at Grimm's back again, their gazes were different from before. Anyone who could control a supreme grade item was not to be trifled with. Traversing through a foreign plane that was extremely repulsive to oneself was a difficult task. However, Grimm had the protection of the Vulcan orb. After isolating himself from the suppression of the plane, it was not too difficult for him to bear. As he struggled forward step by step, the AI chip projected a countdown at the corner of his black eyes. The numbers on it changed rapidly every second. 37 hours, 26 minutes, 41 seconds until the suppression of the plane is lifted. From a moment he stepped into the world of ice, the chip had begun to analyze the laws of the plane. As the analysis of the laws increased, Grimm's strength, which had been suppressed to the initial rank 2 realm, slowly but steadily increased. Before him was a vast and boundless field of snow and moss. As far as the eye could see, it was pure white everywhere. There were oddly shaped icicles, snowdrifts, and snowflakes that filled the sky. The bone-chilling wind whistled past, and as soon as it reached Grimm's body, it was warmed up by the layer of fire clouds. When it blew on Grimm's face and body, he could not feel the slightest bit of coldness from it. When the warm wind blew past Grimm's body, it suddenly encountered a bone-chilling cold. Crackling sounds could be heard as it froze into pure white powder and ice shards, scattering all over the ground. Just as Grimm was strolling forward, a small mound suddenly rose from the snowy ground. The snow exploded, and a group of strange-looking snowworms surged out. These snowworms had thick and furry fur. They had 2 legs and long ears on their heads. They had large, sinister mouths that took up half of their bodies, and their eyes were bloodshot. Sensing Grimm's strange aura, these snowworms let out strange cries and charged forward. Their basic strength was not strong, only at the level of a middle-ranked acolyte. However, they had the advantage in numbers, and with the help of the extremely cold weather, their attacks were slightly threatening. Grimm casually threw out 2 explosive fireballs, blasting 2 large holes in the snowy field and burning 7 snow worms into charcoal. Faced with such an impressive result, Grimm could not help but frown. Once again, he felt the helplessness of fighting in a foreign plane. If this was the sorcerer world, these 2 explosive fireballs from his hands would definitely create a sea of fire that covered a radius of 100 meters, annihilating more than half of these little fellows. But now, the 2 explosive fireballs only created a shallow hole with a radius of 5 meters, and the number of snow worms killed was less than what he had expected. This made Grimm feel a little awkward and helpless. His strength was being suppressed too much here. Just as Grimm slightly frowned, a strange crackling sound suddenly came from the empty snowy field not far away. More than 10 nearly transparent ice crystal monsters charged at him from the side with crackling footsteps. These creatures were much stronger than the snow worms, and they had the strength of a grade 1 sorcerer. Moreover, their bodies were made of completely transparent ice crystals, so they could perfectly blend into the background in this snowy environment. It was almost impossible for ordinary people to see them with their naked eyes. Attracted and bewitched by the plane's consciousness, these native creatures could not measure the huge difference in strength between them and the invaders, and they still rushed forward without a care for their own safety. Chapter 1262. The ice creatures continued to charge forward without a care for their own safety. However, their bravery and fearlessness were like beautiful soap bubbles in the face of absolute power, popping at the slightest touch. A wave of aboriginals charged forward, then vanished into thin air. Another wave of aboriginals charged forward, then were crushed to pieces. The one at the forefront of the five-man party was no longer grim, but the variant scorpion Sand King with its hard shell. The Sand King did not exert much of its strength, and just stomped forward like a heavy tank, crushing through the horde of monsters. While the Sand King was not as tall as some magical beasts that were tens of meters tall, its terrifying ability to control sand caused a layer of yellow sandstorm to encircle it at all times. Any creature caught in the sandstorm would be crushed into a shapeless, bloody pulp by the terrifying sandstorm. When the Sand King charged past, it would only leave behind rows of strange limb marks, as well as large puddles of flesh and blood. As for the Aboriginals' desperate counterattacks, the icy air, icicles, and snowballs, all of them smashed into the Sand King's indestructible insect armor. Apart from adding a few blue marks and a few streaks of frost to its massive body, it did not do anything else. At first, the creatures that came out from all over the ice moss snowfield to attack the ambushing party were just small fries of apprentice level. As the party continued to push forward, after advancing 100 miles through the ice moss snowfield, the level of the aboriginals attacking them had increased significantly. Apprentice snow worms, beginner grade 1 ice crystal monsters, intermediate grade 1 blue devils, advanced grade 1 berserk snow apes, beginner grade 2 ice demons, advanced grade 2 ice souls. The ice moss snowfield was clearly a place with a rich supply of monsters in this icy world. Along the way, the party did not stop for a single moment. They were either surrounded by monsters or ambushed by random wild monsters. To be honest, these aboriginals were quite talented. However, when they were up against top-notch powerhouses from other dimensions, their meager ice abilities and insignificant physical strength were nothing in the eyes of Grimm and the rest. It didn't matter if they were hiding in thick piles of snow, burying themselves in the path that the team had to pass through, or stirring up a snowstorm to ambush them. Without matching absolute power, no matter how many tricks they played, it was all in vain. Since they came, they would stay. He turned into ice shards on the ground and returned to the origin of the plane. Tens of thousands of ice creatures paid the price with their lives, but they couldn't even scratch the skin of a single team member. The difference in strength between the two sides was too great. It was so great that numbers and tactics couldn't make up for it. The party was still moving forward at a leisurely pace. Of course, if there was a need, the members of the team would be able to travel thousands of miles in an extremely short period of time and appear at the entrance of the Frost WRM's nest. However, he had just arrived, and he was still burdened by the severe suppression of the plane. Hence, the party members deliberately slowed down their pace, leisurely slaughtering the natives, while silently waiting for the plane suppression on them to weaken. Spellcasters relied on the analysis of the Maxim to find ways to reduce the suppression of the Dimension Maxim on their own strength. Meat shields like the Sand King, on the other hand, relied on the adaptability of their bodies. Their ability to analyze the laws of the plane was weak, but their ability to adapt their bodies to the environment of the plane was great. That was why the party was in no hurry. They maintained a steady pace and approached their target step by step. Deep down, Calmness and the others were hoping that the Frost WYRM would lose control of its nature and charge out of the nest to fight them to the death. That way, they could at least weaken the Frost WRM's geographical advantage. Otherwise, barging into the terrifying nest that the Frost WYRM had been running for 1,000 years was undoubtedly a risky move. However, the chances of that happening were minuscule. No great lord would come out to fight a few beings of the same level for the sake of some commoners. 3 days later, after crossing the snowy plains of ice and crossing the Arctic Valley, the party finally arrived at their destination after a long and arduous journey. Here, the undulating, steep, lofty, and snowy peaks of the past were nowhere to be seen. Everything within a 50-kilometer radius was a flat plain. The ground was covered in a thick layer of ice that was at least 10 meters thick. Beneath the ice was a terrifying icy ocean that flowed slowly and occasionally seeped with chilling air. The depth of the ocean was immeasurable. Even the powerful one's spiritual senses could not penetrate its depths. There was almost no sign of life here. Even the howling winds carried a hint of deathly stillness and coldness. In the center of the ocean that was covered by the ice sheet, a towering ice cliff rose from ground. The top of the ice peak was directly immersed in the thick and dense clouds, making it difficult for one to see the actual situation on it. "It knows we're here." Calmness was the one who spoke. His crimson soul fire flickered in his eye sockets, emanating a chill that was even colder than the frigid air. "I can feel that its power is increasing." The others did not speak. They were all using their own methods to sense the terrifying existence on top of the mountain. Grim raised his head. A crimson ray shot out from his flaming eyes, aiming at the peak of the mountain. Through the thick layers of clouds that resembled an icy storm, he could vaguely see what was happening above. Above the icy peak, between the clouds, there seemed to be a majestic palace standing silently. Just as Grim wanted to take a closer look, the thick layers of clouds stirred restlessly, scattering his long-range vision and energy senses. Everything became blurry and chaotic once more. "AI, Chip, do a self-check and see how my condition is." Beep. "Check complete." Grim. "Male. Rank 4.5 megas of loss. Fire specialization. Chaotic physique. Odd Jou's magic resistance. Astral beast bloodline, 15%. Heart of laws. Law of fire, 76%. Stats, strength. 27 vitality. 31 plus 2. Agility, 19. Spirit, 44 plus 5. Bloodline talent. Energy black hole. Law of fire. Increased flame range, solidified. Flame penetration, solidified. Flame invisibility, solidified. Flame impact, solidified. Host current condition, plane suppression, analysis of Icy World's laws is at 100%. Host strength is suppressed to initial rank 4. Base battle strength is at 82% of normal. Elemental might is at 76% of normal. Might of laws is unaffected. After the self-check, Grim looked at the stats and could not help but be speechless. With the AI, Chip's help, he had almost completely analyzed the suppression of the plane's laws, but he had only raised his base battle strength to 82% of normal. His companions were far more affected by the plane suppression than he was, and their battle strength, however, everyone's recovery rate was their own secret. If it was leaked, it would be easy for others to deduce their spiritual force and recovery rate. Therefore, even if the few of them had formed a combat team, they would not share this kind of information. This is the entrance to the Great Frost Dragon's lair. Cogniz's spiritual force grew restless at this point. If we go any further, we'll reach the place where the Great Frost Dragon enslaved the Frost Giants live. Frost Giants? Grim was stunned. Didn't most of the ancient Frost Giants perish? How can there be Frost Giants here? Kikik. True ancient Frost Giants are powerful beings at rank 6 or 7. How can they be enslaved by a rank 4 Frost Dragon? Cogniz laughed sinisterly. That's why the ones living here are just bastards who have inherited some of the Frost Giants' bloodline. It's a pity that many of them are rank 3 or 4. They won't be easy to deal with. Hee, they're just small fries. If you think it's too troublesome, I'll do my best to take care of them all. However, I want to share the spoils of war. The Sand King laughed evilly. Dream on. Serpentina stuck out her sharp tongue and said coldly, "Everyone, let's do it together. Make sure to leave no traces. Don't let these fellows interfere with our mission." The group nodded and did not say anything else. They all stepped onto the ice sheet of Arctic Island. Before they had even walked 100 meters on the ice sheet, everyone stopped in unison and silently observed their surroundings. Behind and in front of them, huge icicles rose abruptly. Tall and mighty strange giants walked out from within. Their skin was the color of tile, and there was a hint of transparency to it. The color of their bones and blood was darker. It could be seen through completely. There were both men and women, and they were all wrapped in simple and crude animal skins. They were all around 11 to 12 meters tall. The male frost giants were more muscular. They were bald and had well-developed muscles. Their white pupils seemed to be brewing a terrifying ice storm. The female frost giants were more petite. Strands of strange hair made of icicles floated behind their heads. Without exception, they all had the violent strength unique to the giant race. At the same time, they also had the terrifying power of extreme cold. Among the 17 frost giant descendants, the leader had the strength of a rank 4 beginner, while the rest were almost all rank 3. Only 2 of them looked like underage children, but they also had the terrifying strength of a rank 2 intermediate. "Stop, outsider!" The voice of the leading frost giant was loud and clear. As he shouted, the entire frozen sea began to surge and roar. The nearby ice sheets also shattered. "This is the territory of the great frost dragon axe. You do not have permission to enter." "TSK, what era is this?" "There are actually people who like to sign up before fighting." Grimm secretly despised them as he mercilessly threw out the large-scale fire spell that he had prepared for a long time. Chapter 1263. The battle started quickly, but it ended even faster. Against a group of primitive giants who lacked high-grade equipment and only had powerful physical strength and the power of ice, the few invaders present were quite experienced. Crimson Flame Storm, Death Ripple, Group Petrification Ray. The earth trembled, psionic energy overflowed. After unleashing a barrage of berserk skills, the dozen or so frost giants surrounding Sure Foam collapsed, utterly defeated. The weaker ones had their external force fields dissipate, their bodies entangled by strange red, white, and gray energies. They howled in pain and fell to the ground. Only 3 of the strongest frost giants managed to resist this round of attacks. They roared as cold winds swirled around them. They raised their hands and threw thick icicles at Grimm and the others. These icicles were at least a meter in diameter and contained an absolute chill that could turn anything into ash. Forget ordinary creatures. Even the few grade for existences present would find it difficult to escape once they were enveloped by this chill. The reason why the ancient frost giants were so strong was because they had a deep understanding of absolute chill. Magi called it the power of laws, while the giants who were born from the will of the world called it the source. No matter what they called it, these fellows who had researched and mastered a certain power to the extreme were not to be trifled with. However, their success was due to the rules, and their failure was also due to the rules. The ancient frost giants were born from the will of the world, and their strength was unparalleled. The power of extreme chill that the source controlled was enough to annihilate anyone who went against them. That was why they had made a name for themselves in ancient times and were worshipped by countless mortals. However, once the will of the world changed and the Titans rose to power, the other branches of the giants began to decline. Once the frost giant race declined, they were besieged by many new races. The bloodline of the ancient frost giants was thus severed. Only some remnants of the bloodline remained in some remote or lowly places. These descendants of the frost giants could not recreate the terrifying might of the ancient frost giants. Either their physical bodies were greatly flawed, or their control over the power of ice was not strong enough. In short, they had the looks of a grade 4 creature, but their true strength was far from the source of their bloodline. A round of wild attacks killed off most of the ice giants, leaving the Sand King to deal with the remaining 3 strongest fighters. Sand King had the strange ability to travel underground. With a burrow, he disappeared on the spot, evading the ice giant's sudden counterattack. When he reappeared, the Sand King was already at the feet of the 3 ice giants. As the ground trembled, the ice cap cracked, and the Sand King's huge and tough body emerged from the ground, pushing the 3 ice giants into the sky. Amidst their panic, the Sand King extended his 2 giant pincers and clamped the 2 Tier 3 advanced stage frost giants into 2 halves. Then, it knocked down the Type 4 ice giant, its stinger stabbing into the ice giant's chest, injecting a steady stream of terrifying venom. As expected of a Tier 4 creature, the leader of the frost giants did not die immediately even in such a state. Instead, it roared and raised its arms, grabbing tightly onto the Sand King's pincers. It opened its mouth to the limit, ready to spit out the most powerful force of ice in its body. A terrifying chill gathered at the frost giant's throat. Its color was faint, so white that it was almost transparent, but the law of extreme frost within it made all the powerhouses present frown. Although the frost giant's bloodline was on the wane, once this terrifying attack, which was condensed from all its blood essence, was unleashed, even a Tier 4 powerhouse would find it hard to endure. The Sand King immediately began to struggle frantically. Its two giant pincers and the frost giant fought wildly, shattering the bones in the frost giant's upper limbs. The poisonous stinger that had been stabbed into the frost giant's chest stirred wildly, turning it into a bloody mess. Unfortunately, the frost giant's violent strength before its death was not that easy to shake off. The frost giant was clearly prepared to fight to the death. No matter how heavily injured its body was, it would rather die than let go. If this had been a normal combat team, in order to protect the Sand King as a meat shield, everyone might have thought of a way to save the frost giant. However, the team before them was a temporary team made up purely of evildoers and wanderers. No one was willing to put themselves in danger to save a teammate. But there were always exceptions to the rule. Just as the frost giant was about to spit out the power of extreme frost in its mouth, a tall, pitch-black figure that shone with a strange metallic luster appeared from the shadows behind the frost giant. The extremely sharp metal blade in its hand stabbed into the back of the frost giant's head. Dark energy surged in, instantly wiping out the frost giant's brain and consciousness. The extremely condensed power of extreme frost finally went out of control. Under the control of the ice giant chieftain's will, the power of extreme cold that was supposed to be sprayed onto the Sand King's body suddenly exploded. It turned into a ring of ice that spread out abruptly, rippling in all directions. Wherever the power of extreme frost reached, the world lost its color. Everything lost its original color and was completely sealed in a layer of beautiful ice crystals that were harder than steel. A moment later, the ice crystals exploded and the power of extreme frost flowed in all directions, turning everything into white shards of ice that could not be shredded anymore. Under such circumstances, no life form could survive. However, there were always exceptions to everything. Amidst the exploding white shards of ice, two equally tall and mighty figures broke free of the ice crystals. Withstanding the terrifying power of extreme frost, they charged out of the area covered by the ring of ice. The Sand King's originally pale golden body was now covered in white ice crystals. As it broke free, it shook its body violently, shaking off large clumps of ice shards. After the white was gone, the Sand King appeared unscathed, as if it had not suffered any damage. However, everyone present could clearly sense that the Sand King's almost violent earthen yellow origin energy had also been tainted with a hint of white. It had fallen for the trick after all. However, everyone's gaze only lingered on the Sand King for a moment before landing on the tall metal puppet behind it. A grade 4 puppet, everyone's gazes turned cold. Off to the side, Grim smiled faintly. I'm a spellcaster. I'm not good at close combat. It's logical and reasonable for me to bring a metal puppet with me. With that, Grim took a blood-red crystal and a drop of blood marrow from the Shadow Fiend. He weighed them in his hand and said with a chuckle, Sand King, I've done you such a great favor. You don't mind if I harvest some materials, do you? The Sand King swayed its huge body and glanced at Grim with its green compound eyes. I don't mind at all. Thank you for helping me out just now. Otherwise, I'd have suffered a great loss. The Sand King moved its huge body and shook off the thick ice crystals on its metal shell. Then, its body turned into a black shadow and slowly merged with Grim's back. However, it had merged without any flaws previously. Even the powerhouses did not notice its existence. Now, however, the lingering power of extreme frost had added a strange energy to the shadow fiend's dark energy. It was no longer as untraceable as before. The teammates could not help but force a smile, but they immediately raised their guard. The spellcasters, in particular, felt their hearts tremble. Even their movements became unnatural. What were spellcasters most afraid of? Of course, it was the elusive assassins. Now that Grimm had brought along a shadow fiend with such a powerful stealth ability, everyone present could not help but feel their hair stand on end. Fortunately, the shadow fiend was tainted with a trace of extreme frost energy, allowing them to track its position. Otherwise, they would not have dared to let a grade 4 shadow fiend run around them. After taking down all the frost giants, the team members could not help but stop and start harvesting the necessary materials. They would be letting down the frost giants' illustrious reputation if they did not take the opportunity to collect some of these high-grade bloodline materials. Everyone moved. Soon, the corpses of the frost giants were divided up. In the eyes of others, the frost giants might be some kind of powerful, intelligent life form, but in the eyes of this group, they were just some freely moving materials and resources. The group crossed the territory of the frost giants, passed through dozens of kilometers of ice, and finally arrived at the foot of the towering ice cliff. Looking at the snow-capped peak that was covered in a thick layer of crystal-clear ice, everyone looked at each other and rose into the air one after another. They stuck close to the ice wall and slowly flew upwards. The closer they got to the peak, the more they could feel the deathly stillness and coldness that filled the entire space. Here, they could no longer feel any signs of life. The only thing they could feel was the throbbing in the depths of their hearts. The ancient winter box was undoubtedly here. However, its aura was concealed by another powerful soul undulation. Everyone cautiously penetrated through the thick layer of clouds that floated halfway up the mountain. After flying for a full hour, they finally landed on the peak of the ice mountain. This was a huge platform that had a circumference of several dozen kilometers. At the very center, a tall and majestic divine hall of ice stood silently. The entire temple did not use a single bit of earth or wood. Instead, it was made of pure, sparkling, and translucent ice rocks. Inside the hall, there were hundreds of exquisitely carved ice pillars decorated with mysterious patterns that supported the spacious space. On a tall ice platform at the back of the hall, a strange giant dragon was lying on it. Sensing the appearance of an unfamiliar aura, it lazily lifted its head and sized up the crowd. Frost Dragon. Chapter 1264. It was a strangely shaped dragon. It was clearly a gigantic skeleton that resembled that of a skeletal dragon, but in the gaps of the joints, in the enormous cavity of its chest and abdomen, and in the tiny holes of the bone membrane of its wings, there was a blue, bone-chilling air of extreme coldness everywhere. The crystal-clear frost wrapped most of the bones inside, but strangely, it did not affect the movement of the giant dragon at all, as if the ice that was harder than steel was all illusory. The mighty power of the colossal dragon and the pervasive power of ice combined to form this super terrifying frost colossal dragon in front of them. Why is it an undead dragon? Grimm frowned. I remember that frost dragons are creatures of flesh and blood. Where's its flesh? While Grimm had never seen a grade 4 frost dragon in a lance plane, he had killed plenty of grade 1 and 2 frost dragons. And those ice dragons were all creatures of flesh and blood, not undead. This means that the ancient winter chest is in its hands. The scarlet soul fire of Lich Kingina's looked at the frost dragon high up in the shrine from a distance of nearly 1,000 meters. He said coldly, "It might have been a giant dragon with flesh and blood in the past, but after coming into contact with the ancient winter box for a long time, its flesh and blood will inevitably be corroded. Don't forget, the ancient winter chest has the law of ice and death." Grimm immediately understood after hearing the Lich's explanation. As expected, everything had its pros and cons. This frost dragon coveted the law of ice within the ancient winter chest. Once it absorbed the energy within, its flesh and blood would inevitably be eroded away by the law of death. This was the law of death of a high-ranked god. Flesh that had been eroded by it could not be regrown with its own regenerative abilities. This frost dragon had been completely transformed by the power of death, becoming a frostbone dragon that possessed both the power of frost and the power of death. It was now an undead dragon through and through. Lowly and greedy invaders, I can smell the wails of the resentful souls of the kingdom of frost on you. Your actions will be punished by fate. I will freeze you in ice and erect you at the entrance of the temple as a warning to those who don't know what's good for them. The frostbone dragon raised its body high, the azure wings on its back unfurling. The colorful runes and the swirling cold air covered its entire body. From afar, it looked like a beautiful work of art wrapped in blue light. Shameless boasting. The Lich could not help but mock. If I'm not wrong, you're trying to fuse the ancient winter chest into your soul, right? Bastards, you guys really did come for that thing. The frostbone dragon roared loudly. Great amounts of frigid air surged out of its mouth, causing the temperature in the divine hall to plummet by more than 100 degrees. The ancient winter box possesses the laws of death and ice. To reach Tier 5, you want to merge it with your soul. You wanted to fuse it with your soul, but you underestimated its power and overestimated yourself. To succeed, you even turned yourself into an undead creature. How ruthless. The Lich said coldly, now that we're here, you'd better hand it over, or else. Perhaps the Lich's words had completely infuriated the frostbone dragon. It roared for a while and suddenly lowered its body, charging toward the party of 5 with rumbling footsteps. Sand King, Lamia, stop it! Lich Kongus's shrill voice rang out. It took a few steps back and began to recite the incantation to open the necromancy space. Damn it, this fellow is too big. The Sand King roared hoarsely. I can only block a dozen of its fingers at most. Good luck to you after that. With that, the Sand King shook its body, and a large amount of yellow smoke was extracted from the ice peak beneath it and poured into its body. Its body, which was originally less than 5 meters long, instantly swelled up like a balloon, turning into a giant worm that was 12 to 13 meters long. It charged towards the frostbone dragon. The frostbone dragon's tail was 35 meters long, and its body was several times the size of the Sand King. Therefore, the collision between the two giants was like a comet crashing into Earth, instantly stirring up a terrifying hurricane in the center of the hall. Wherever the ripples of energy swept out, the nearby towering icicles and clusters of ice that could be seen everywhere immediately exploded into ice shards that filled the sky. They were swept away by the hurricane in all directions. The lighter Lamia was pushed back by the hurricane before she could even get close to the battlefield. She only managed to stabilize herself by wrapping her tail around an icicle. The star spirit was a little strange. 3 glowing shields floated around it, enveloping itself within them. Meanwhile, its body crouched on the layer of ice, strange runes flying out of its body one after another. The runes seemed to possess some sort of incomprehensible power. They flew toward the icy blue light in the depths of the hurricane like birds leaving their nest. Grimm was also rapidly reciting a spell. As his incantation grew louder, a huge door of light formed from pure flames appeared and slowly opened. The next moment, a tidal wave of flaming creatures rushed out and charged at the frostbone dragon under Grimm's command. All right, watch me. Almost at the same time, Lich Kongus's necromancy domain opened up. A strange skeletal door materialized in the air. As it opened, squads of elite undead soldiers appeared before everyone in an orderly fashion. At the front of the line was a horde of ghouls, numbering 200. Their slimy bodies were devoid of any skin, revealing the thick and tough muscle fibers beneath. They hunched their bodies and crawled on the ground. Their protruding spines were filled with bony spikes. Their main weapons of attack were the sharp claws at the ends of their limbs, as well as their ferocious fangs and long tongues that could shoot up to 2 meters away. Behind the ghouls, there were a dozen necromancers wearing death magic robes and wielding bone staffs. They were natural-born necromancers and could cast most of the death spells and several terrifying curses of the dead. There were more than 30 undead knights on both sides of the necromancers. They ranged from the lowest skeletal horse knight, grade 1, to the highest retribution knight, grade 4. They included almost all knight-type undead creatures. They were not the strongest in Lich Cogniz's personal army. As the elite undead army continued to appear, the sound of bones cracking could be heard from the back of the army. A 15-meter-long bone dragon appeared in front of everyone. "Undead army, get rid of this annoying fellow for me." Lich Cogniz waved his staff, and all the undead let out a silent cry before charging into the battlefield from the side. Flaming creatures, undead army, psionic runes. The 3 mighty figures used all sorts of means and immediately summoned powerful and terrifying troops, charging into the battlefield from all directions. At this point, the Sand King could not hold on any longer. After all, the gigantified body that he was gifted with was not real. In every collision and energy exchange, the Sand King had to bear the pressure brought about by the disparity in size. The frost skeletal dragon's body had been forged by the power of ice to be stronger than steel. In the frenzied collisions, apart from some ice shards and ice shards, there were almost no other injuries. The Sand King, on the other hand, was already riddled with wounds. Terrifying cracks could be seen everywhere on the insect shell outside his body. Before the stinky insect blood could splatter, it was frozen into ice crystals by the cold air that engulfed the entire world. The Lamia, Sakina, moved quickly around the periphery of the battlefield with her agile body. From time to time, she would climb onto the ice pillars and attack the frost skeletal dragon with rapid snake arrows. The Lamia, Sakina, had 6 arms. 2 of her arms were wielding battle swords to cut the ice crystals flying toward her into pieces, while the other 2 arms were knocked with bows and arrows, shooting strangely shaped snake arrows. These snake arrows came from the snake-like hair on her head. Every time a snake arrow hit an enemy, the arrow would cause terrifying physical damage to the enemy. At the same time, it would instantly turn into a venomous snake and entangle the enemy. This was also one of Sakina's ultimate long-range attacks. Unfortunately, these kind of harmless long-range attacks were completely ineffective against the frost skeletal dragon Nax. The snake arrows could not penetrate the protective layer of ice on the surface of Nax's gigantic skeletal body. As for the snake venom and snake arrows, they were frozen into ice crystals before they could even be used. The disparity in size made the Lamia, Sakina, not dare to approach the frost skeletal dragon at all. Once she was directly attacked by the frost skeletal dragon's power of extreme cold, she did not have the Sand King's thick insect armor to protect herself, nor did she have the Sand King's powerful strength to break free from the ice crystals. To put it bluntly, fighting this frost skeletal dragon Nax was simply too unbearable. As long as the Sand King was within the range of the frost skeletal dragon Nax's icy halo, his every move would become abnormally slow and difficult. His many appendages and giant legs would be frozen on the spot from time to time. He could only rely on his powerful physical strength to shatter them, so that he could regain his ability to move. Hence, after struggling for 13 times, the Sand King could only retreat from the battlefield while crying out. And just as he retreated, a large group of flaming creatures, undead armies, and psionic runes surrounded him. Looking at the black mass of enemies swarming toward him from all directions, the frost skeletal dragon Nax let out a furious roar. It opened its mouth and spat out a gust of extremely cold air that spread across the battlefield. Chapter 1265. Icy Breath. It was extremely pure and powerful. There were no physical attacks mixed in, nor were there any other elemental effects. The only thing it had was an extremely low temperature and a bone-chilling coldness. This was more than enough to deal with enemies in the mortal world. At the end of the day, icy breath was just a single elemental effect, and Grimm had seen too many similar attacks. Whether it was the full-powered attack of a Grade 2 ice dragon or the desperate counterattack of a Grade 4 ice giant, although the effects were different, their power was still within the limits of the laws of the plane. However, the ice breath in front of him had clearly exceeded the scope of a rank 4 ability and was approaching the power of a god. Yes, it was the power of a god. Gods were high and mighty, possessing terrifying power that surpassed mortals. Naturally, they were not restricted by the laws of the plane. Divine spells that used divine power as the source were naturally 10 times or even 100 times more powerful than ordinary spells. The icy breath of Nax that covered the entire area not only covered a large area, it was also extremely powerful. It contained traces of the law of ice that ordinary people could not resist. Under the envelopment of this strange power of law, it did not matter if one was a gigantic creature, a powerful assassin that moved as fast as lightning, or a spellcaster with layers of magic radiance. As long as one was not protected by the power of law, they would not be able to resist the invasion and destruction of the law of ice. The low-level fire creatures and ghouls did not even have the chance to resist before they were frozen in the thick ice. Then, as the layer of ice cracked, they broke into pieces. The ground was filled with pieces of frozen corpses. There were no traces of blood, no screams, only a surging cold aura. On the other hand, the powerful undead knights and intermediate and high-level fire creatures could barely struggle in the ice. However, they didn't have the ability to resist the law of ice, so they shattered into ice shards along with the ice cubes. The undead knights that had exploded into countless pieces did not die completely. They were still struggling and trying their best to break free from the ice and piece their bodies back together. After the flaming creatures were destroyed, their original flaming bodies disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a flaming core that was still burning on the ground. The blazing core was burning inside the ice. It wanted to use the heat of the flames to melt the ice and regrow its body. The powerful army, made up of almost 2,000 fire creatures and elite undead creatures, collapsed and vanished into nothingness under the chilly breath. As far as the eye could see, there were less than 10 people who were still alive and could barely be seen. It could be said to be extremely miserable. However, after the frozen bone dragon Nax breathed out, the blue frost on its body, which was made up of ice crystals and bones, also became a little thinner. Looking at its appearance, it seemed that such a large area of effect attack was a heavy burden on it. Outside the battlefield, boom, 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 a series of explosions rang out. The ice crystals exploded, and cold air filled the air. Grimm, Congenas, and Taurus broke free of the ice, shrouding their bodies, and revealed themselves. The Sand King, on the other hand, had long since burrowed into the ground and escaped this wave of terrifying attacks. Meanwhile, the Serpentine woman, Sklyna, was frozen on an icicle by the rampaging cold air. She was like an ice sculpture, unable to move at all. She did not have a tough body like the Sand King, who could break free from the ice with just physical strength. But after a burst of strange, strong light, the blue ice crystal on Sklisthena's body faded and turned into a grayish-white powder, scattering all over the ground. Sklyna, who had forcefully broken free from the ice crystals, opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of black blood. She glared at the huge frozen bone dragon that was still bearing its fangs and claws in the ice crystals, then turned around and disappeared into the hall in a flash. In such a chaotic battlefield, Grimm did not send Shadow Fiend out to attack the frozen bone dragon. Instead, he had to guard him closely to ensure his safety. That frozen bone dragon Nax had clearly fused with half of the austere chest. Its terrifying might was not something an ordinary grade for creature could compare to. Being too high profile in a fight against such a creature would easily attract its attacks to himself. That was something Grimm was unwilling to do. Still, showing off a little was fine. Grimm waved his staff and condensed over 100 fireballs in one breath. He threw them at the bone dragon that was hiding in the ice crystal fog. The momentum of the fireballs and the ferocity of the attack were simply eye-catching. The frozen bone dragon, who was looking around for its next opponent, was immediately attracted by the violent fireballs. Two balls of cold light, as bright as stars, shot out from the depths of the fog and landed on Grimm's body. The next moment, the fog dispersed. Nax's mighty and ferocious body rushed out. He opened his long and narrow dragon mouth and ruthlessly bit at Grimm. One was a huge frozen bone dragon that was 35 meters long, 12 meters tall, and weighed dozens of tons. The other was 2 meters tall and weighed no more than 100 kilograms. If these two creatures with such a huge difference in strength were to clash, the weaker one would be crushed to death, and the weaker one would be crushed to death. Grimm wasn't stupid enough to clash head-on with such a colossus. He used Flame Leap to evade the attack, and reappeared in another corner of the hall a kilometer away. The first thing he did was to wave his staff and summon a huge crimson flame storm, which he threw at the ice bone dragon. The frozen bone dragon Nax's body was too huge, so it was natural that it could not move easily. Just as it turned its body and locked onto Grimm's position, the huge flaming storm exploded with it at the center. A thick pillar of fire soared into the sky, and the raging flames engulfed the space within a 300-meter radius. The extreme temperature and terrifying flames ignited everything in the world. Even the air and the ice crystals started to burn. As a top-notch fire elemental magus, every fire spell that Grimm cast was imbued with the corresponding law of fire. In order to move a huge creature like Nax, the piercing flame was a must. Otherwise, without the law of fire, no matter how fierce the flames in the world were, even if Nax was thrown into a sea of fire and boiled for half a year, it would not be able to harm him in the slightest. Only flames imbued with the law of fire could penetrate the mist of ice crystals on the surface of Nax's body and transmit traces of fire damage to its huge and powerful body. Of course, the damage was only a tiny bit. However, Nax's enemies were not limited to Grimm. While the Frostbone Dragon was chasing after Grimm, a large cloud of dense death aura and strange psionic runes landed on its body at the same time. Wherever the death aura spread, the ice crystals melted and the cold air dissipated. The dragon bone that was enveloped by the death aura instantly turned deathly pale. The bone spikes and the icy force field on the edge of the bone sizzled as they were corroded, showing signs of turning black and rotting. The psionic runes were even more miraculous. They completely disregarded any defenses on the bone dragon's body and floated into its bones, causing the icy aura surging within to become restless. If not for the terrifying icy force field condensed in Nax's body and the powerful spiritual force that negated a portion of the psionic damage, Taurus might have used the psionic runes to scatter the icy energy in the bone dragon's body and turn it into terrifying chaotic energy. Chaotic energy was a terrifying poison to any creature in the plane. Poison from energy. Nax raised his dragon neck and let out a resonant dragon roar. The dragon's roar contained traces of uncontrollable pain. For 100 years, the last time he tasted pain was 400 years ago. But now, a bunch of bastards had barged into his palace and damaged his noble body. They even wanted to scheme for the treasure that he loved more than his life. At the thought of this, Nax could no longer suppress his rage and rage. He wanted to use his ice-cold and merciless dragon breath to turn his enemies into ice sculptures, and then use his imposing body to crush them into dregs. Nax roared angrily. Blue light flashed in his eyes, and powerful icy energy immediately filled the entire goddess of Ice Palace. The floor of the Ice Palace, which was as hard as steel and as smooth as a mirror just a moment ago, began to shake violently and undulate like waves. Sharp icicles broke through the ice, instantly turning the place into a sea of ice. The tall and hard ice forest occupied most of the space, blocking everyone's line of sight. The dazzling cold light and thousands of reflections made it difficult for them to determine the true location of the frostbone dragon. The ice crystal fog that filled the entire space clearly had the effect of reducing and refracting spiritual senses. It could effectively suppress the visual and spiritual senses of the intruders. After all, this was Nax's home ground. He was incomparably familiar with every inch of space here, and he knew every single aura like the back of his hand. Thus, once their senses were blocked, the intruders that had barged into the goddess of ice lost their advantage in fighting as a team. Instead, they became the bone dragon's prey. Serpentina, who was the weakest among them, immediately became nervous. Her wriggling, snake-like hair flicked in and out of her terrifying serpent tongue, instantly helping her determine all possible directions that the enemies could attack from. Meanwhile, she concealed her aura and silently moved between the ice pillars and the roof of the palace. Below her, the ice forest was filled with dense fog. Thousands of distorted and strange figures were violently swaying, making it difficult to distinguish which was real and which was fake. It was even more impossible to determine the true location of the other party. The thin star Sol Turaz transformed, his entire body turning into a cloud of mist filled with a strange dark light. He slowly fused with the ice crystal mist, and no traces of him could be found anymore. Seeing this, Grimm smiled. With a sweep of flames, his body also disappeared under the protection of the law of flame invisibility. Chapter 1266. F*CKU. If not for the millennia of loneliness and coldness that had eroded all of Congenus's feelings and emotions, he would have cursed his disloyal teammates. Damn it, I'm a spellcaster. Do you expect me to deal with that unreasonable bone dragon when you're all hiding? Before he could finish cursing in his mind, the crimson soul fire in his eye sockets shook violently. Damn it, that bone dragon is here. The surroundings were still shrouded in thick fog and icicles. Even with Congenus's slender body, it would be difficult for him to move through it. The forest of icicles was still as peaceful as ever. The fog flowed silently, as if nothing had changed. While he couldn't see the bone dragon's body or hear its footsteps, the strange, chilling aura thickened. It was so cold that he couldn't help but shrink his soul fire and shiver. Without hesitation, Congenus raised the strangely shaped, short-handled bone staff in his hand. A grayish-white shockwave of deathly aura engulfed everything within a 100-meter radius, corroding everything in its path. The crystalline forest of icicles, in particular, turned black and yellow from the corrosion before crumbling into a pile of black ash. Even the ever-present ice crystal mist was thinned by the impact, vaguely revealing the surrounding scenery. Within the fog, a towering figure shrouded in blue light appeared and charged at Congenus with a roar. With a wave of the white bone staff, a few strange figures appeared and blocked the path of the bone dragon's charge. One of them was the beginner grade 4 hardbone dragon. The other two were also beginner grade 4 retributionites, and the other was a middle grade lich. Sensing the vast dragon might pressing down on him like a mountain or a sea, as well as the ferocious aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas, Xiao Qian's heart sank. Had it not been for Congenus's command, the hardbone dragon would never have gone head-on against the frozen bone dragon. Unfortunately, as a soul slave under the lich, the only thing the hardbone dragon could do was to sacrifice itself and wipe out all its enemies. Hence, amidst a deafening rumble, the two bone dragons of different attributes and sizes clashed fiercely against each other. In the next moment, a ripple of energy swept out, and all the creatures that did not meet the required size were swept up uncontrollably. They were thrown to the periphery by the violent and ferocious shockwaves. Then, broken dragon bone fragments and powder-like ice shards were blown away in all directions by the raging wind. Amidst a burst of strange popping sounds, the surface of several thick icicles near the battlefield crackled as they were hit by the bone fragments and ice shards. In an instant, many honeycomb-like holes appeared. The Lich and Lich were sent flying, and only the Bone Dragon and the two undead knights barely managed to stay on the battlefield. Huge blue ice shards and powder rolled up, once again overturning the ferocious battlefield. The turbid air and the overflowing violent energy stirred up the space. Any mental strength that entered the battlefield was crushed, and it was difficult to see what was going on inside. A hard bone dragon and two retribution knights were fighting against the frozen bone dragon. Although both sides were at grade 4, the huge difference in strength was not something that could be easily overcome by numbers. After a moment, the battlefield suddenly fell silent. A huge bone dragon skull was thrown out, and it skidded on the cracked ice ground for 100 meters before coming to a stop. Through its empty eye sockets, one could see that the bone dragon's soul fire had been extinguished. It was clearly dead. As for the two retribution knights, they remained in the ice crystal fog and did not show themselves. However, considering the difference in strength between both sides, it was easy to imagine what would happen to them. Congenus, who had flown 1,000 meters away, roared in exasperation. "Sand King, I know you have recovered. Immediately, block this fellow from me right now. Otherwise, our deal will be nullified." The Lich could not help but feel exasperated. While a grade 4 Harbone Dragon was not a top-tier war pet, it was still one of the top elite slaves under Congenus. Now, it had been sacrificed on the battlefield for no reason, and two retribution knights had been sacrificed. Even the Lich, who had lived for thousands of years, felt the pain of such a huge loss. These grade 4 undead slaves weren't low-level undead that could be recruited in droves from the skeletal plane. Many elite grade 4 slaves were actually created by the Lich with his superb necromancy skills and alchemy, using expensive magical materials and gems. Losing one was enough to break his heart, and losing 3 in one go was even more painful than having a dagger plunged into his heart. However, no matter how many or how expensive the slaves were, they were not as important as his own life. That was why the Lich did not hesitate to abandon them when it came to a moment of life and death. As if sensing the Lich's rage, the Sand King's strange insect body burrowed out of the ground and wriggled its fat, but in front of Congenus once more. With the protection of the meat shield, Congenus was finally able to relax. He floated to the ground and quickly dictated a spell with the help of the grade 4 Lich, preparing to unleash an ultimate necromancy spell. Energy surged within the ice crystal fog, and dragon roars could be heard. The frozen bone dragon Nax seemed to be fighting with the Lamia Sheena again. The battle was intense. In an instant, flames burst out from the depths of the fog. Grim took the opportunity to sneak up and tossed a molten core fireball at Nax's abdomen. Ice and fire intertwined. Ice-type spells were a branch of water-type spells, and they had the same effect as fire-type spells. Thus, even Nax found it difficult to endure the terrifying pain that penetrated his soul as he was roasted by the ferocious flames. Another shrill dragon roar that tore through the clouds rang out, followed by clouds of blue mist chasing after a flaming figure, smashing a wide path through the forest of ice clusters in the hall. Just as the ice and fire burned, a huge psionic formation appeared on the ground where the blue fog was the thickest. Immediately after, countless beams of psionic energy converged and coated Nax's huge and imposing body with a layer of strange light. The next moment, psionic energy exploded. A portion of the power of ice within Nax's body was disrupted and turned into chaotic energy, causing it to instantly lose control of a portion of its dragon body. "Bastards! You damn bastards! I will—" Before the frozen bone dragon could finish its roar, it was interrupted by another wave of attacks. The entire hall instantly turned into a slaughterhouse of blood and flesh. Large amounts of ice energy seeped out of Nax's body, polluting the surrounding space to the point where it was extremely filthy. Taking advantage of his teammates holding back his opponent, Congenus and the Necromancer's dark blood rain fell from the sky and covered the entire goddess of ice. The gloomy sky darkened once more. Thick black clouds rose from the ground, and quickly covered the entire battlefield. As the light dimmed to a point where it was hard to see, a putrid stench of rain fell from the sky. Amidst the disgusting stench, the rainwater splashed as it fell on the ground. It wasn't normal rain, but rotten blood. Under the baptism of the evil blood rain, the ice crystal fog was corroded, revealing the horrifying high-level battlefield below. The ice crystals quickly melted under the blood rain, giving the two combatants more space to maneuver. The battle had only lasted a few minutes, but Serpentina was already heavily injured. She gritted her teeth and retreated from the battlefield. Her once beautiful upper body was now purple and blue, and one could see the light blue frost marks left by the invasion of the frigid air everywhere. A lot of flesh and blood couldn't withstand the corrosion of the power of extreme coldness and exploded into fine ice shards, leaving behind large and small bloody holes on the ground. Fortunately, the temperature in the hall was extremely low. The wounds on her body were frozen by the frost energy, so she didn't lose too much blood. Otherwise, Sakina's combat power would be reduced by more than 30% due to the blood loss from the holes that were densely packed like honeycombs. Half of her wriggling snake hair had already frozen to death. The ice crystal snakes were rapidly eroding and exploding into ice shards that filled the sky. As for the long snake tail behind him, it was now cut in half. Although the remaining tail was covered in fine scales, it was still cut by the sharp ice blades and snow swords. She slithered on the ground with such a snake tail. Every step she took caused her snake hair to stretch and her teeth to clench. As for the Sand King, who was the main force in the battle, he was also in a miserable state. The thick insect armor covering the surface of his body was already full of cracks. Every time he collided with the frostbone dragon, stinky and filthy insect blood would spurt out from the cracks, dyeing the ground with dark spots. One of the Sand King's giant pincers was bitten off, and a scorpion tail behind him was broken as well. It hung on the flesh and scales, barely hanging on. In comparison, Grim and Toras, who were spellcasters, were in a much better situation. The two of them roamed around the periphery of the battlefield. When they saw an opportunity, they would flash over and attack like a storm. Once they found out that the Frostbone Dragon had the intention to focus fire on them, they would turn around and run without hesitation. As for the dignity and glory of a grade 4 powerhouse, those things were better left for the martyrs to enjoy. There was a dark rain of blood above, a rotten land below, and a few grade 4 powerhouses in the middle. Although the battle was still in a stalemate, from the overall situation, it was obvious that Grim and the invaders had the upper hand. Even if the Frostbone Dragon Nax had outstanding combat ability, it couldn't withstand such a terrifying pressure when 5 powerful evil beings gathered together. Chapter 1267. The frozen skeletal dragon was indeed very powerful. However, with its current strength, it was still not strong enough to contend against a party of 5 type 4 powerhouses with their own strengths. The reason why the battle was so intense was because the experts were preoccupied with their own matters. They held back and could not work together to bring out their strengths. In all fairness, in terms of individual strength, Lich Kingina's Astral Soul Turas and Grim were not any weaker than the frozen skeletal dragon. However, this was just an interesting hunt for them. They would reap great rewards if they succeeded, but if they failed, they would return to their lair to lick their wounds and fight again. Hence, they would subconsciously avoid opportunities that required them to pay a certain price in order to deal great damage to the old dragon. After all, this was an unfamiliar team that had been put together at the last minute and was suppressed by the will of the world of ice. Furthermore, none of them were willing to risk their lives to fight the old dragon, which was why the battle was dragged on for so long. However, the strength of the team was there for all to see. No matter how much the old dragon struggled and fought, it could not escape the fate of defeat. However, what Grim found most strange was that no matter how intense the battle was or how bad the situation was, the frozen skeletal dragon did not leave the goddess of ice shrine. It kept its feet on the ground and continued to fight against the experts. He could not help but feel suspicious. Sand King, you don't have to fight anymore. Go to the center of this icy mountain and see if there's anything strange there. Grim leaped and dodged the frozen skeletal dragon's ferocious pounce and tail swipe as he yelled. I suspect that the winter chest is not on the old dragon, but Grim did not use mental telepathy to say this, but shouted it out loud. Hearing that, not only were the members of the expert team stunned, even the old dragon shuddered. The soul fire in its empty eye sockets could not help but tremble. As expected, something was wrong. Through the old dragon's reaction, the members of the expert team immediately understood. No wonder the goddess of Ice Shrine had such a strange and cold aura. This aura did not originate from the frozen skeletal dragon, but from the ancient winter chest buried deep within the icy mountain. Although the ancient winter box possessed the powerful ice law, it also possessed the death law that ordinary people would find difficult to approach. If one were to look into its origin, the ancient winter chest was actually not suitable to be Naxx's origin saint artifact. In order to advance to Tier 5, Naxx did not hesitate to damage his own body to absorb the law of ice within the ancient winter chest. This caused the power of ice in its body to become even stronger. However, the law of death that came with it also transformed its body into something neither human nor ghost, turning it into an undead bone dragon that people despised and despised. Although the overly intense soul modification had greatly increased its strength, it had also firmly bound it to this place. Before completing the final modification of its soul, it could not take a single step out of the Ice God Hall, nor could it soar above the blue skies like ordinary dragons. As for why he didn't bring the ancient winter box with him, the reason was very simple. It simply couldn't withstand the powerful and terrifying nomological power within. Evolving from a nomological law to a nomological law was not as simple as changing the word. The laws were the basic rules that the plains system followed, and they were usually just a small branch of some grand law power. Just like the law of fire, it was an abnormally large and complete system of power. And the law of fire that Grimm had grasped was only a small tentacle of this enormous power of law. Only when there was enough law power gathered together would it be possible for Grimm to pry into the mysteries of the operation of the law system through the law power he grasped. As for grasping a complete law power, this was not something that a low-level life form could accept or bear. Tier 4. In the plane, he could be called a god, and was also given the title of demigod. However, in essence, he was still just a mortal body. From his body to his soul, he was made up of all sorts of substances from the plane. Since he couldn't break free from the restraints of the plane's consciousness, he naturally couldn't transcend the plane's consciousness and act on behalf of the plane's laws. All the law power within the plane was controlled by the plane's consciousness, and it definitely wouldn't hand over its authority to outsiders. Even those that could come into contact with the power of the plane's laws would suffer the backlash of the plane's consciousness if they weren't honest enough. That was why an ancient treasure that contained the power of 2 different laws was far more meaningful to the frozen skeletal dragon Naxx and the lich Khan genus than anyone could imagine. Seeing that Grimm had discovered the winter box's location, the frozen skeletal dragon Naxx was infuriated and terrified. He didn't even need to blow the horn for the final battle. With a simple sentence, Grimm had forced the old dragon to fight to the death. If Khan Genus wanted to get the winter box, he wouldn't be able to do so if he cowered. If the old dragon decided to fight to the death and forced his companions to retreat, Khan Genus wouldn't be able to withstand the ferocious attacks and the terrifying cold in a one-on-one fight. Therefore, without any explanation, the battle instantly became white-hot. The old dragon no longer cared about the damage the cold could inflict on his body. He began to absorb the terrifying power of laws within the winter box and madly turned it into a blizzard that engulfed every inch of the goddess of ice. At this moment in the battle, the real battle between the 2 sides had begun. In such a harsh environment, the powerhouses could no longer gather their strength. They could only fight on their own and wait for the old dragon's backlash to arrive. Whether the old dragon would use his explosive power to cripple them or wipe them out, or they would endure until the old dragon ran out of energy and suffered the backlash of the winter box would depend on the strength of both sides. The goddess of ice could no longer see or sense anything. Everyone's spiritual senses were suppressed to a certain limit by the bone-chilling power of the winter box. Even with their fourth-order senses, they couldn't extend their spiritual tentacles beyond 50 meters from their bodies. Such a narrow field of vision had obviously forced them to the edge of a dangerous cliff. If they were not careful, they would end up dead and their souls destroyed. But no matter how dangerous it was, none of the party members chose to leave the goddess of ice. They simply didn't want to lose the chance to obtain the ancient winter box. Even though the ancient winter box didn't seem to be compatible with their souls, and they had already promised Congenus to help him obtain the dual attribute divine weapon, the chance was right in front of them. Everyone had a good chance of fighting for it in the midst of a chaotic battle. Who would give up on such a rare opportunity? At the very least, Grimm couldn't let it go. At a time like this, everyone only cared about themselves. Who cared about the life and death of others? Grimm held the Book of Darkness in his left hand and the flaming coral staff in his right. His entire body was enveloped in a blazing red domain. Shadow Fiend was faintly discernible beneath him, constantly on guard against his surroundings. Grimm walked forward without hesitation. His tight black leather suit made his figure look even taller and more imposing. His lips were tightly pursed, and his gaze was cold. The skin on his smooth forehead split open to reveal a strange diamond-shaped crystal. Under the control of the focusing crystal, Grimm's spiritual force was highly concentrated. Large amounts of fire energy surged out from the Vulcan orb and the Heart of Rule, gathering around him. Once he sensed the enemy's presence, Grimm's earth-shattering attack would definitely leave him with an unforgettable memory. As for whether he would hurt his teammates, at this point, there was no such thing as teammates. Anyone who dared to get close to him was someone with ulterior motives. Grimm wouldn't hesitate or go easy on them. A violent shockwave rippled 375 meters to his left. Grimm could sense the auras of the old dragon and the Sand King from the shockwave. The Sand King's hoarse cries of pain could be heard clearly in the murky, frigid fog. Judging from the level of power unleashed by both sides, the Sand King, who had taken quite a bit of damage in the previous battle, would probably be forced out of the competition by the old dragon. As expected, with a heart-wrenching roar, the Sand King's unique power and aura fled into the distance, charging out of the Divine Hall of Ice. The Sand King had left. Grimm searched for the platform in the fog, while trying to figure out who the old dragon's next target would be. The Lamia, Celeste, or himself? Congenus was a terrifying lich renowned throughout the world. If this was all he had, he wouldn't have lived up to his reputation. So, he must have hidden a portion of his combat power. Under such circumstances, if the old dragon didn't want the others to benefit from the fight, the best choice would be to get rid of the others first. If that was the case, the old dragon wouldn't choose the weakest Lamia, but before Grimm could finish his thoughts, the fog in the distance parted and the old dragon, riddled with wounds, charged at him with a roar. First, Frost Breath opened a path, and a dazzling blue dragon breath surged towards Grimm in an earth-shattering manner. The range was so large, and the temperature was so low that it was beyond what Grimm could sense. Chapter 1268. Beep. Warning, warning. High energy and low temperature particles are approaching. Estimated low temperature energy damage in the core region is over 7,900 degrees, with a radius of 216 meters. Please evade immediately. Beep. Detected the existence of a strange law of ice. Effects unknown. Recommended for host to leave this area immediately. Chaotic physique activated, absorbing and converting 783 degrees of low-temperature damage. Bloodline innate ability, energy black hole activated, diverting and nullifying 1,695 degrees of low-temperature damage. Fire law activated, negating 3,742 degrees of low-temperature damage. Fire protection force field activated, negating 630 degrees of low-temperature damage. Elemental resistance raised to the limit, negating 561 degrees of low temperature damage. Host will suffer around 489 degrees of low temperature damage. With a series of chip prompts, a large amount of cold air swept over, instantly enveloping Grimm and everything around him in a blue fog. The cold air rolled over, colliding with Grimm's fire defense and elemental force field. In an instant, the magic shield that was surrounded by flames froze into ice crystals. Even the ice beneath Grimm's feet could not withstand the terrifying low temperature. A layer of azure frost formed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and it quickly shattered. Even the Shade Lord hiding in the shadow space was affected by the law of ice. Its entire metallic body was covered in a layer of ice, showing signs of being frozen. Grimm's robe, which was still fluttering violently a moment ago, turned as cold as steel in the next moment. Azure frost rapidly extended along the edge of his robe, trying to freeze his entire body on the spot. Not far away, the indomitable Icebone dragon was still roaring as it charged over. Once Grimm was frozen in the ice, he would probably be smashed to the ground by the old dragon before he could break free, and then crushed into a pulp. Compared to draconic magic, dragons prefer to use the most direct and violent method to end a battle. Shade Lord, go! Almost as soon as they met face to face, the ferocious old dragon almost forced Grimm into a dead end. Therefore, Grimm did not dare to slack off. While loudly issuing orders to the shadow fiends, he flipped through the pages of the Book of Darkness in his hand and released one ugly servant corpse after another filled with vicious plague. These servant corpses were mostly grade 1 cannon fodder and would not be able to display any strength in a grade 4 battlefield. The moment they were summoned in front of Grimm, they were blown away by the frigid aura, instantly turning into strangely shaped ice sculptures. However, when the old dragon charged over like a bulldozer, the ice sculptures exploded one after the other. Large amounts of yellow-green smoke were released from within, causing dark spots to appear on Nax's pure blue body. Plague poison. Damn it, this is plague poison. You bastard. How dare you release plague poison in my chamber? I'm going to kill you. Furious, Nax lunged forward and bit at the retreating Grimm with his big blue mouth. At this moment, Grimm no longer held back. The Book of Darkness shone with a green light, and Grimm was instantly buffed by the toxic aura. The focusing crystal on his forehead shone like a star, and his spiritual force surged into the flaming coral staff in his right hand. The disguised divine fire bead at the tip of the staff glowed with brilliance, overflowing with the colorful radiance of supreme grade item. However, in the next moment, all the radiance dimmed, leaving only the divine fire bead that was getting brighter and brighter. Just like the bright moon hanging high in the sky, the appearance of the fire god bead made all the light in the world dim and colorless. The only thing left in the entire space was the sun that was still incessantly burning itself, continuously increasing its heat and light. That's right, the divine fire bead was like a small sun that had fallen to the ground. As its power increased, it also emitted terrifying light and heat. Nax, who was pouncing over, had a look of horror in his azure blue eyes. He could sense that the terrifying sun in the young wizard's hand was definitely a supreme grade treasure that was not inferior to the austere winter chest. What was even more frightening was that the wizard seemed to be able to control the terrifying flame energy in it as he pleased. He could feel a small sun rising in front of him, and he was getting closer and closer like a moth flying into a flame. Nax let out a loud dragon roar in horror. He extended his two enormous azure dragon wings to their limits and beat the air with all his might, barely managing to stop himself from pouncing forward. All of his front and rear dragon claws sank into the ice crystals beneath his feet, leaving 20 deep ravines on the ground. However, just as its momentum came to a screeching halt, Grimm's attack was already at its peak. He clasped his hands together. In an incomparably violent flame, energy shot out from the divine fire bead, forming a meter-thick beam of light that struck the frostbone dragon's huge body. The moment the beam of light touched his body, Nax felt as if he had been thrown into a terrifying furnace of flames. Every part of his body began to burn from the inside out, from top to bottom. What was even more terrifying was that even the ice energy surging in his body seemed to have been ignited by this pillar of light and started to burn. Nax raised his long neck and let out an extremely painful roar. What gushed out from his huge mouth, nose, eyes, and ears was no longer the blue power of cold. Instead, it was a blazing scarlet flame that surged out. It was just a single strike, yet Nax's soul was damaged to the point of origin. After that, he turned around and charged back into the mist like an extremely miserable, defeated dog. In the depths of the mist, Lich Kongness was rapidly approaching the platform. He was surrounded by all sorts of strange, undead creatures. It was thanks to their rampage that he managed to find the rough location of the platform. However, just as he was about to sneak over, he suddenly stopped and turned back to look at the depths of the mist. There, a terrifying aura of energy rose 1,000 meters away, instantly suppressing the pervasive frost energy. Sensing the strands of extreme heat and the terrifying burning intent, Kongness couldn't help but feel uneasy despite his calm and cold demeanor. While he was quite a distance away and was isolated by the chaotic frost energy, it didn't stop Kongness from identifying the source of the energy. Grim. It was the human Magus who called himself Fireman Grim. Since when did he become so powerful? He remembered the last time he fought with him in the Morian Plain, he had a 70% chance of killing him. It was precisely because of this confidence that the Lich Demon Lich dared to invite the other party to encircle the old dragon. But now, just based on the level of the energy aura leaking out, the Lich probably had no chance of winning. Kongness couldn't help but wonder if his plan would work now that such a powerful being had infiltrated their ranks. Kongness didn't know that the moment he sensed Grim's outburst, Taurus had already snuck onto the platform and was searching for the ancient winter chest with all his might. The moment Grim's aura erupted, Taurus, who was deciphering the runes on the platform, raised his head and looked in the direction of the battlefield. Such power, Taurus muttered. Even if he's not a powerful being, he's not far from it. Did the human Magus use some explosive tool, or is he just relying on his own strength? No matter what, I'll have to be careful around him. Due to his unique energy system, Taurus wasn't afraid of opponents of the same rank. But out of respect for a powerful being, he didn't want to get himself into trouble. Powerful beings, even in the eyes of Celestials, they were a terrifying bunch. Forget it. I'll let them fight amongst themselves. I'll think of a way to get the ancient winter chest first. The thought of a transcendent item falling into my hands made Taurus's heart burn with passion. However, just as the two experts each had their own thoughts, the Lamia Sheena, who was hiding in a corner of the ice shrine, was madly cursing and ridiculing in her heart. Bastard, bastard, bastard. Kongness, where did you find this god of plague? I had thought that the Frostbone dragon was already powerful enough, but now it seemed that the real monster was hiding right beside me. Bastard, the battle here has already surpassed the limits of my abilities. No, I can't stay here any longer. I'll become a stepping stone for those bastards. As she cursed, the Lamia dashed towards the edge of the mist like a bolt of lightning. The battle here had escalated to a new level. It was no longer something a small character like her could participate in. If she stubbornly insisted on staying, she would become an unstable factor that the true competitors would want to eliminate. It couldn't be helped. Only the strongest in the party had the right to obtain the powerful treasures. The second and third ranked fellows would try their best to fight for it, while a marginal character like her would be lucky to get the leftovers. However, the human wizard that she had always looked down on turned out to be the biggest boss in the team. This was beyond her expectations. Thinking of her sarcastic words towards him along the way, Sakina felt a little apprehensive and couldn't help but secretly curse herself for being as blind as a bat. Bastard, bastard. You're all a bunch of bastards. You're so strong, yet you pretend to be a noob. Umph. I curse you to never walk out of this goddess of ice. Chapter 1269. The Goddess of Ice on the Mysterious Platform. Turaz was still diligently studying the various mysterious and bizarre patterns carved on it, but he had no choice but to stop halfway through his work. It couldn't be helped. The old dragon had returned. The anticipated battle between Fireman and the old dragon did not happen, or rather, it happened too quickly, so Turaz was blocked by the old dragon on the platform before he could find a real entrance. Seeing the frozen bone dragon Nax break through the fog and reappear in front of him, Turaz felt a little sad. This old dragon was simply too pitiful. After forcefully transforming from a frost dragon to a frostbone dragon, the scales and flesh on Nax's body had already disappeared without a trace. All that was left were jagged bones that were harder than fine steel and the gigantic bone spurs that looked like flagpoles. And in between the greenish-gray dragon bones, periosteum, and bone cracks, there was a dazzling blue icy aura. The azure power of frost filled the bone dragon's chest, abdomen, and skull. It even condensed into strange ice flower runes on the surface of its body. A layer of transparent blue ice crystals enveloped every inch of the bone dragon's bones. If one wanted to attack the bone dragon's body, they would first need to break through the ice force field outside its body, and then break through the layer of ice crystal protection. Only by breaking through these two basic layers of defense would it be possible to extend the attack to the bone dragon's body. In this frigid divine hall, Nax seemed to possess limitless power. He could use the terrifying power of cold in an extravagant manner. This was its lair and also its home ground. In this goddess of ice, no grade 4 creature could defeat the frozen bone dragon Nax, who had the support of the ancient winter chest. But there were exceptions to everything. The only thing that could defeat a transcendent holy weapon was another transcendent holy weapon. The old dragon did not dare to carry the winter chest with him, and could only absorb the power within it endlessly. Now that he was suddenly faced with Grimm, who had two transcendent holy weapons in his hands, he naturally lost in an instant. Terrifying golden flames exploded on the old dragon's body. No matter how the old dragon beat and gathered cold air, he could not get rid of them. The golden flames and the blue cold air collided in a frenzy within its body, almost causing all the energy within the old dragon's body to go berserk. The once elegant, arrogant, holy, and mighty frostbone dragon Nax was now covered in flames on one side and ice on the other. Using its body as the battlefield, its energy and life force as fuel, the two strange powers of the law frantically fought against each other. And every time they collided with each other, the amount of vitality that Nax was most reluctant to part with, the frost skeletal dragon Nax was almost unable to see anything due to the scorching flames. It staggered all the way back to the mysterious platform. Right now, it urgently needed the help of the ancient winter box. Only the pure and abundant power of the harsh winter could extinguish the stubborn flames on his dragon body. However, when it rushed back to the high platform, it immediately saw the evil star spirit that was trying to break the glyph formation. Narx almost went crazy. Although it was heavily injured by the law of fire, it still had its mighty divine power and peerlessly powerful draconic magic. How could it be afraid of a lowly thief? It opened its mouth, and a strange dragon breath that was intertwined with ice and fire hit the blue starlight. Damn it! How did this old dragon return so quickly? While cursing in its heart, Star Spirit Turaz's body flashed with psionic energy and quickly condensed a few psionic shields in front of it, blocking the scorching dragon breath that was sweeping towards it. If it was just the flames and cold air, it would not be a big deal. This kind of shield made of psionic energy could perfectly defend against any elemental magical particles. However, the two powers of the law attached to the dragon breath were the most terrifying. They stuck to the shield along with the scorching flames and the incomparably cold dragon breath. While entangling and fighting with each other, They also frantically destroyed the stability of the psionic energy. The few psionic shields did not last until the end of the dragon breath, and they exploded into brilliant fireworks amidst a series of crisp explosions. In the next moment, the old dragon's charred mouth opened wide, and it smashed through the sky full of fireflies. It fiercely bit towards the blue cloud-like and strangely beautiful body of the star spirit. Damn it, it's actually the power of two elements, and it's such strange ice and fire. Star spirit Turaz did not even have the time to curse. With a flash, its body moved horizontally by 100 meters, and it avoided the terrifying mouth that was coming down from above. But as soon as its body appeared, the old dragon's scorched tail pierced through the mist and appeared in front of it with a whistling wind. After all, this was Nax's home ground. Not the slightest change in energy or disturbance in the goddess of ice could escape its eyes and ears. Thus, Turaz could not bear to move too far away from the platform, and it flashed a little closer. It immediately suffered 2 consecutive attacks from the old dragon. This time, Star Spirit Turaz could not react in time. The thick and long dragon tail directly crushed a few of the psionic shields that had just appeared, and it whipped at Turaz's strange cloud-like body. There was no sound of bones exploding, nor was there the sound of flesh exploding. The blue ball of light that was formed purely from clouds and mist, along with the starlight nodes within it, were scattered by this terrifying force. The blue ball disappeared in an instant. When it reappeared, it was already 500 meters away in the depths of the mist. After a period of difficult assembling and reassembling, the cluster of stars were formed. However, more than half of the starlight nodes that formed the body of the star spirit had been lost, and the cloud-like psionic energy that formed the periphery of the body had been lost by nearly 30%. Damn it, this is a huge loss. Turaz propped up his body with difficulty and said hatefully, "The psionic circuit has been scattered and reassembled, and I've lost 30% of my psionic energy. With such a huge loss, I'm afraid I won't be able to make up for it in less than 100 years. Damn old dragon, I'll make you pay the price." Cursing under his breath, Turaz adjusted the power of the psionic energy. Soon, countless strange rays of light shot in all directions, and its beautiful and strange body disappeared once more into the mist. After chasing away Turaz, the old dragon Nax rushed back to the platform. As soon as his aura came into contact with the dense rune lines on the platform, a strange rune of light appeared and completely enveloped him. The aura of the old dragon's soul and the rune of light interacted, and after a series of verification and examination, a ball of light finally lit up in the center of the platform. A small opening appeared on the smooth ice crystal slab, and from it a thick, almost solid, cold air gushed out. As soon as the liquid cold air came into contact with the outside air, it immediately disintegrated into a thick mist that spread in all directions. The old dragon couldn't wait to move its mouth closer to the entrance of the cave and greedily absorb the power of cold in the liquid form. Strangely enough, as soon as the cold energy entered his body, the golden flames that were burning all over the old dragon's body were instantly extinguished. The blue cold energy once again dominated his entire body, and even the exposed dragon bones that were exposed after the ice crystals broke were covered in a layer of ice crystal armor after the cold air flowed through them. However, along with the cold energy, an abnormally pale aura of death also entered his body. The influx of these auras immediately caused the old dragon's originally vigorous life aura to become dull and decayed. Many of the blue and exquisite dragon bones instantly turned black and yellow, and a putrid aura unique to undead creatures immediately wrapped around Nax's soul. As a once proud and majestic giant dragon, it had always loathed undead creatures. But now, for the sake of greater power, it had no choice but to give up its pride and glory as a dragon and throw itself into the arms of undead creatures. To Nax, who had always viewed glory as his life, this was undoubtedly a huge blow to his soul. However, at this critical moment of life and death, it could no longer continue to be ignorant. The old dragon Nax suddenly raised its nose and took a whiff. The violent and ferocious cold energy mixed with the sinister and terrifying energy of death frantically washed over its soul, doing its best to transform it into a form suitable for a super-rank sacred tool. If there were no external enemies invading, it could extend this transformation process to several hundred years. This way, the pain that the origin of its soul had to endure would be distributed over a long period of time. But now it did not have that much time and could only risk its life to carry out the transformation. This way, the risk of the transformation failing would increase drastically. The old dragon Nax raised its neck and let out a long and mournful cry of pain. Its body, which had been blue a moment ago, was now rotting and withering at a speed visible to the naked eye. The cold energy and the energy of death intertwined within its body, causing its body to rapidly turn black and brittle, as if it had been brushed with ink. This kind of double transformation from the physical body to the soul was not something that ordinary people could endure. Even the old dragon Nax could only desperately howl, using its mournful dragon cries to vent its indescribable and terrifying pain. The mist continued to tremble. Near the high platform, two strange figures slowly walked out, one on the left and one on the right. They looked at the roaring dragon on the high platform, then at each other. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable greed and vigilance against a powerful enemy. I didn't expect you to hide so deeply. Lich Kongus on the left was the first to speak. It seems that you have completely subdued the holy book of wisdom. Otherwise, you wouldn't have such great power. Its scarlet soul fire glanced at the book-shaped magic tool in Grimm's hand, and its eyes were filled with deep regret. If it had known that the holy book of wisdom was so powerful, it would have taken down this fireman in the Morian plain, even if both sides suffered heavy losses. But it was too late to say anything now. Chapter 1270. I gave you the book of wisdom the last time. You won't fight me for the austere winter's chest this time, will you? Kongus asked without batting an eyelid. His tone, however, was solemn and even a tinge of fear. It couldn't be helped. The terrifying blow that fireman had just shown was simply amazing. Even someone as powerful as Old Dragon Axe was beaten to the point of turning around and running away. He ran back here to take the risk to heal his injuries. If it had been a lich instead, he wouldn't have fared any better than the old dragon. That was why Kongus's attitude had played a decisive role in the battle against the old dragon. The lich had no choice but to take it seriously. That the transcendent item we're talking about, and a dual-attributed one at that. You want me to give up on such a prize? Don't you think you should compensate me? Grimm pulled down his hood and revealed his handsome face. His eyes burned with golden flames, the resplendent crystal on his forehead, the thick tome in his left hand, the strange staff in his right, and the fiery force field around his muscular body, with the help of the powerful wizard artifact and the shadow demon hiding beside him. Grimm's powerful and ferocious aura had already enveloped the entire area, even though he did not make a sound. Facts speak louder than words. Only true power could be used as a bargaining chip in negotiations. I can use a small resource plane to trade for it. The profits there are considerable. You'll get at least 2 million magic crystals every year. Kongus gritted his teeth and took out his bargaining chip. A small plane, 2 million. Grimm could not help but smile. If your excellency feels that this is comparable to a dual attribute treasure, then I'll give you a small resource plane, and this treasure will belong to me. Then I'll give you 3 grade 4 undead servants. I can give you control over their souls. That way, you'll have 3 grade 4 helpers you can use. Kongus's soul fire trembled as he spoke. A tier 4 undead servant. That wasn't some cabbage that could be found casually. In order to create a tier 4 undead, aside from all sorts of high-tiered magic materials, one also needed to search for powerful and complete souls. Only with all of these, coupled with its superb undead modification skills, would there be a certain chance of producing a so-called high-level undead. Although these undead created through necromancy and alchemy were not as ferocious as wild ones, they were more loyal and reliable. That was why even a lich of Congness's level didn't have more than double digits in the number of grade. For servants he had after gaining full control of a bone plane. Now that it had thrown out 3 of them in one go, for it who had always been diligent and thrifty in running its household, it was as if its bones were being cut off and the pain seeped into its bones. If it wasn't for the treasure it was determined to obtain, it would never make such a sacrifice. As if admiring the lich's grief-stricken expression, Grim finally spoke. Since you're so unwilling, I'll give up on your resource planes and subordinates. Hearing this, the shaman demon was shocked. The aura around his body immediately rose. You want to go back on your word? I can consider giving this treasure to you, but the condition is, what is it? You have to serve me for 100 years. The scarlet flames in the shaman demon's eye sockets ignited. Even the 2 large rubies on the surface couldn't hide it. You're insulting me. Human magus, we liches have our own pride. Our souls are free, and we will never become someone else's servant. If you want to enslave a lich, you can try. It was obvious that Congness was extremely sensitive and stubborn about the matter. He would rather die than comply and fight to the death. I'm not talking about enslaving your soul when I say 100 years. I'm inviting you to become a foreign elder of my family. I promise I won't force you to do anything dangerous for the next 100 years. All you have to do is make a name for yourself in the Crimson House and open a necromancy department in the Family Academy. You can also recruit and nurture human apprentices. Of course, you'll have to help if the Crimson House runs into any problems. In the next 100 years, not only will I not touch any of your assets or resources, I'll even give you the authority you deserve as an elder and a share of resources. How about it? You can accept these conditions, right? Congness looked at Grim and couldn't help but ask, Grim, what are you trying to do? I don't believe you'll help me out of the kindness of your heart. As if prepared for the lich's doubt, Grim calmly said, Congness, even if you get the ancient Winter's chest, will you be able to fully fuse with it in 100 years? The lich had obviously considered this question before, so he answered without hesitation. That's impossible. This is a grade 5 dual-aspect divine weapon. Even with my strength, I'll need at least 200 years to fully fuse with it. Then it's settled. Grim chuckled. You won't be able to roam around for the next 100 or 200 years after you get the Winter's chest anyway. Why don't you become an elder and name in my house? You have so many high-order undead under you. You can easily send any one of them to take care of trivial matters like setting up a faction or organizing a school. You can also go into seclusion and do some research. Also, the resources of the Magus world are much better than those of the Lich's Union you've joined, right? If you need anything, you can use the Crimson House's channels to gather it. This is the last bit of sincerity I can show you. At this point, the flames around Grim's body suddenly surged, and his entire body instantly turned into a 10-meter-tall flame giant. His muffled warning sounded like rolling thunder, echoing above the God of Eyes for a long time. As if sensing Grim's threat and sincerity, Congness's soul fire flickered, and he nodded silently. Very well. If that's the case, make your move. I'll help you get the Winter's chest. As soon as he finished speaking, Grim raised his staff without hesitation and took the initiative to attack. He did not attack the old dragon that was crawling on the platform, absorbing the divine weapon's power. Nor did he attack Congness, who was on full alert. Instead, he attacked the empty fog not far behind him. The fog was faint, and the ice crystal floor was as smooth as a mirror. There were no signs of enemies at all. However, as a crimson pillar of fire descended, the tens of psionic shields suddenly exploded and revealed Celestial's strange misty body. I'll block Celestial for you. I'll give you half an hour to take down that old dragon. If you don't succeed in half an hour, we'll switch opponents. What do you say? Grim said in a low voice. Congness looked at Celestial, who had suddenly revealed herself, and hissed, Deal! After saying that, the two of them did not waste any more words. Each of them brought out their strongest side and aggressively charged towards their enemies. Bastard, celestial Turaz, who was thrown into disarray by Grimm's wild attacks, roared, "Fireman, what did that lich promise you to make you work so hard for him? Tell me, and I'll double the price. I just want you to help me block that lich. What do you think?" Grimm's tall man chuckled. "He's willing to serve me for 100 years. Can you do that?" "What? How is that possible?" Celestial Turaz quickly dodged and exclaimed, "He actually agreed to such a condition? Fine, fine. I can also serve you for 100 years. 200 years. The lich's furious roar came from afar. Although he was fiercely attacking the old dragon, a part of his mental strength was still paying attention to the battlefield. 200 years. Even for a grade 4 powerhouse, 200 years was not a short time. Although a lich could not achieve immortality, it would not be a problem for them to live for thousands of years. Hence, 200 years was really nothing to them. They just had to endure it, and it would pass quickly. But for other creatures, 200 years was a long and painful torment. Just as Celestial Turaz opened her mouth, unsure of what to do, Grimm no longer hesitated. With a wave of his staff, the Book of Darkness instantly emitted a dark green aura that wrapped around Celestial Turaz's body. This was the poison aura activated with the help of the Grade 5 Book of Darkness. Although it had not reached the level where he could control the law of poison, it was terrifying enough for Celestial Turaz. Celestial Turaz's cloud-like body instantly turned a wretched green, terrifying plague toxins rampaging in his body. Although most of the toxins were quickly killed by the strange psionic energy, the short battle had caused Celestial Turaz to suffer greatly. What was even more terrifying was that the tall man lowered his body and opened his mouth. A powerful golden flame containing the power of law instantly blew on Celestial Turaz's body. This time, Celestial Turaz was in deep trouble. For the first time, Grimm, with the help of the divine fire orb, added 4 types of law effects to his flame: flame range increase, flame penetration, flame invisibility, and flame impact. Although ordinary grade 4 magi could also control many elemental laws, fusing them with elemental attacks would consume a lot of mental strength. Ordinary magi could only withstand 1 type of law at a time, and those who could fuse 2 or 3 types were all elite magi. Someone like Grimm, who could fuse 4 types at once, was also a powerhouse. Chapter 1271. Elements weren't scary, but laws were. High-grade creatures had powerful elemental resistance, allowing them to reach the elemental immunity stage. The flames, frost, and gales of the mundane world could no longer shake their bodies. At most, they could only cause some trouble for them. The only thing they were afraid of were laws, which were applied to the source of power. These were things they could never avoid, let alone be immune to. Hence, when 2 grade 4 powerhouses decided fight, the first thing they clashed with was the laws they controlled: fire and psionic energy. Both were equally powerful, and they were both part of the multiverse's massive power system. Hence, when they clashed, it was a competition of both sides' comprehension and control of the laws, as well as their ability to manipulate the laws. And in this aspect, Grimm had an overwhelming advantage. The psionic energy Taurus possessed was undoubtedly an abnormally powerful energy. Moreover, it was extremely mysterious, and almost no one in the outside world could comprehend or control it. Hence, in terms of offensive power, Taurus was clearly stronger than Grimm. However, in a competition of strength, apart from the competition of strength itself, the support of strength was also a huge factor. The high-grade equipment Taurus wore might not be bad, but compared to Grimm, who had 2 divine weapons, it was still inferior. Grimm had 2 divine weapons, the divine fire orb for offense, and the Book of Darkness for defense. The help they provided him in a battle of laws was incomparable to ordinary equipment. Thus, as soon as the 2's power of laws collided, Astral Spirit Turaz's expression changed, and an ominous feeling rose in his heart. Flames vs psionic energy. It was actually the berserk power of fire that held the absolute advantage, forcefully crushing the series of psionic energy runes Taurus shot out and directly using the law of fire on his cloud-like body. The psionic energy shield shattered, and the psionic energy runes dissipated. The dark and gloomy cloud-like body was ignited by the law of fire, instantly burning up. Not only was the psionic energy that Taurus had been able to freely control unable to protect the core of his consciousness, it was also forcefully converted into fuel by the law of fire that was surging in, igniting the flames and making it impossible to extinguish them easily. On the other hand, most of Taurus' counterattacks were destroyed by the law flames, and the remaining damage was absorbed by the Vulcan bead. Very little damage could penetrate Grimm's defenses. The strange psionic runes entered Grimm's body and forcefully converted part of the fire energy into terrifying chaotic energy. However, Grimm had the Star Beast bloodline, and his constitution could naturally absorb this chaotic energy. Therefore, the damage caused by the Star Spirit's counterattack was not even comparable to the self-healing power of his strong physique. As soon as the wounds appeared, they healed in the blink of an eye and did not affect Grimm's combat strength in the slightest. 1 plus and 1 minus, 1 strong and 1 weak. Both sides used their strongest attacks at the same time, but the amount of damage they caused was worlds apart and could not be mentioned in the same breath. Amidst the trembling ice crystal mist, the two strange figures fought further and further away, gradually extending the battlefield to the edge of the goddess of ice. Even though they could no longer be seen, the intense trembling of the mist and the earth-shattering rumbles made it easy to imagine the intensity and ferocity of their battle. Kongness, who remained in the center of the battlefield, did not dare to be careless. He could tell that Taurus was not a match for the fireman Grimm. That was why he had to finish off the heavily injured old dragon before the fireman returned. To him, this was obviously a huge challenge. After all, the old dragon's basic strength was there for all to see, and no one could easily take advantage of it. Time was life. For the sake of the ancient winter chest, Kongness was putting his life on the line. Following a series of dark and gloomy magical incantations, the necromancy domain slowly opened up again, and a new elite army of undead swarmed out from within. Without any regard for their lives, they charged towards the frozen bone dragon, Nax, who was crawling on the high platform. An even fiercer and crueler battle was about to begin. Outside the towering goddess of ice, a few members of the party met up again. They each occupied a spot far away from one another, their eyes fixed on the rolling ice crystal mist. Their eyes flickered, and no one could tell what they were thinking. The strange astral seemed to have lost interest in everything in the hall. Clusters of stars lit up inside its cloud-like body as it stared coldly at Grimm, who had a relaxed look on his face. Fireman, that's a grade 5 dual attribute divine weapon. Aren't you interested in it all? Asked the Sand King, who was the first to be banished. His insect body was already in tatters, and cracks and blue frost marks could be seen all over his insect armor. Even so, he was still in a good state of mind, and at least 60% of his strength remained. So what if it's a grade 5 divine weapon? If it's not compatible with your element, you'll end up just like that old dragon and be transformed into something neither human nor ghost. I quite like my human body, and I don't want to become a monster that has no sense of touch or taste. Grimm said calmly, completely ignoring the Celestial's angry stare. Of course you don't care. You already have 2 grade 5 divine weapons, and they're compatible with your innate ability. If you're so good, why don't you use those 2 divine weapons? Let's fight again. The Celestial Taurus was still indignant. After the battle, just now, he had a thorough understanding of this strange fireman's trump card. The Sand King and Elamia's jaws dropped when they heard the Celestial's revelation. They stared at the young magus with shock. They had long heard that the sorcerer's world was a rather powerful civilization, but they still did not expect the people who came from there to be so abnormal. Compared to the old dragon and the goddess of ice, this magus before them was probably the tycoon, that should be defeated the most. The Lamia, who was the weakest among them, could not help but show a hint of worry on her pretty face. Her broken snake tail was also wriggling slightly as she quietly distanced herself from the Magus. Even the Sand King began to roll his complex green compound eyes, silently sizing up Grim, who did not look particularly outstanding. As the top creatures of the other planes, they could judge whether a target was strong or not by whether it had a strong enough body or soul. They did not care too much about weapons, equipment, or magical items. After all, most of their worlds or planes did not have a powerful and complete power system like the Sorcerer's World. They had either gone through thousands of bloody battles to stand out from millions of ordinary beings and evolve to their current state, or they lived in a deformed but rich plane, possessing a strange talent in a certain aspect, but remaining primitive and inferior in other aspects of social life. In fact, most planes were like this. The reason why peak civilizations were strong was not because they were born that way, but because they were nurtured and developed. Many sorcerers of the Sorcerer's World ventured out of their planes to explore the endless sea of stars, searching for rare treasures, conquering many planes, and capturing the essence of each plane to gather in the Sorcerer's World. It was their selfish actions, akin to ants moving house, that unexpectedly formed the consciousness of the Sorcerer's World's plane. The influx of resources and knowledge from the outside world allowed the Sorcerer's World's plane's consciousness to continuously grow, which in turn fed back onto the plane's power system. In the kiliocosm of the vast thousand planes, there were very few peak civilizations like the Sorcerer's World that had a healthy and complete sorcerer cultivation system, complete alchemy techniques, and huge reserves of resources. Grade 4 powerhouses like the Sand King and the Lamia, who came from different planes, might already be peak existences in their own planes. However, in the Sorcerer's World, they were only at the level of a Grade 4 elite sorcerer. Even among the elite sorcerers, the Sand King and the Lamia were not the cream of the crop. They could only be said to be unique. Hence, facing this powerful fire sorcerer from the Sorcerer's World, the Sand King and the Lamia could not help but cower. They were no longer as wild and arrogant as when they first met. As for the astral spirit Taurus, although he was confident that he was not weaker than Grim, he was extremely wary of the two Origin Divine weapons in Grim's hands. To be honest, he had suffered a great loss at Grim's hands because of a moment of carelessness. Hearing Taurus's angry words, Grim almost laughed out loud. He could not help but say leisurely, "In the Sorcerer's World, equipment is also a part of a powerhouse's strength. In fact, it's even classified as a very important part. We human sorcerers do not have the innately strong bodies of magical beasts, nor do we have the innate abilities unique to your race. Without equipment, how are we going to fight you? Don't tell me you're going to ask that old dragon to chop off its claws, legs, wings, and scales before fighting you?" The astral spirit Taurus fell silent. They were all top-notch powerhouses in their own dimensions. Suddenly stepping out of their dimensions and seeing how powerful the powerhouses of other races were, they naturally lost their balance and confidence and became a little hysterical. After a while, the astral spirit Taurus finally asked the question he wanted to know the answer to the most. "I've already given you a lot of promises. Why aren't you helping me but that lich?" "Because it has influence, and you're alone." Grim smiled faintly. "Putting aside the slight difference in personal strength, I'll definitely gain more from helping it in the future than helping you." The astral spirit Taurus fell silent once more. The Sand King, who had been paying attention to the battle in the distance, suddenly exclaimed, "It seems like the victor has been decided." Everyone present raised their heads and began to look into the depths of the mist. Chapter 1272. Lich Kongness had won. This could be heard from the old dragon's cry of despair and indignation before it died. After being surrounded by a few experts and being attacked by Grim without any warning, the old dragon was defeated. Even though the old dragon was far stronger than a normal grade, for expert, and was already close to the edge of a powerful being, It was still no match for Kongness, who had sacrificed so much and was devoured by the sea of undead released by the Lich. There were so many powerful monsters in the world, but the reason why Liches were so notorious was because of their shameless skeleton sea tactic. Moreover, Liches were adept at toying with souls in the sky. Dying by their hands didn't mean the end of suffering. On the contrary, dying by the hands of Liches was the beginning of a long and painful life. Their souls and bodies would not be wasted and would be used effectively by the Lich, becoming one of his many puppet-like slaves. There was no time limit to their servitude, freedom, and dignity. Dying by the hands of Liches meant that their souls and bodies would fall into eternal darkness. They would suffer in endless pain and despair, living a life where they could neither live nor die. The Liches wouldn't let them go unless they squeezed every last bit of value out of their bodies and souls. Nax, who had willingly turned himself into an undead, was a huge treasure trove for the Lich. Apart from giving the Lich a grade 5 divine weapon, his body and soul were also top-notch materials for forging high-ranked undead creatures. It wasn't hard to imagine that in the near future, Lich Kongness would have another powerful frostbone dragon under his command. With such a powerful helper, the Lich would instantly become one of the most powerful beings in the world. When that time came, he would fuse with the ancient winter casket, and his path to grade 5 would be smooth sailing. As Nax's soul aura disappeared, the goddess of ice started to shake violently. The majestic hall that was supported by the power of the divine weapon started to tremble. Ice shards and shards fell from the stone walls and the dome above. The ice shrouding the hall lost its restraining power and slowly dissipated. Finally, another quarter of an hour passed. The mist parted and Songonis walked out, his clothes in tatters. Even though his body was so broken that it was impossible to look at him directly, and even though his spirit was so weak that it made one's heart race, the Lich's crystal skull was still displaying a delighted expression. It could be imagined that its harvest inside was definitely unimaginable to ordinary people. Just the divine artifact and the bone dragon were enough for it to fill its stomach to the brim and take it home as a takeaway. The overjoyed Lich immediately formed a sharp contrast with the Sand King, Snake Lady, and Celestial, who were waiting outside. The three of them had gloomy expressions on their faces and were depressed. Obviously, they were dissatisfied with Grimm forcefully suppressing them and not allowing them to participate in the final battle. It wasn't easy for them to team up and come to this sinister plane, and they even managed to severely injure that sinister and terrifying old dragon. If the members of the team gathered together to kill the old dragon, they might be able to ask for a fair share of the old dragon's treasure. But now, the final battle had been taken care of by the Lich alone. Their personal gains would definitely be greatly affected when it came to splitting the spoils. With that in mind, it was no wonder they looked at the Lich and Grimm with resentment and anger. Somonis was an experienced fellow. He raised an eyebrow and immediately stood up to express his stance. I've opened the door to Nax's treasury. Apart from the winter box, I only took my share and left the rest of the treasures untouched. If you head over now, you can split them evenly. Consider this your reward for participating in this mission. Hearing this, the Sand King and the Snake Lady finally broke into a smile. They immediately dashed into the tottering temple like arrows. Celestial Spirit Taraz stood there for a moment and glanced at the Lich and Grimm before rushing over without a word. After the three left, Somonis turned to Grimm. Grimm's expression did not change. He had no intention of getting up to snatch the treasures. "You're strange," Somonis praised. "You're the most mysterious wizard I've ever met. Sometimes, I really can't figure out what you're after." Grimm did not answer the Lich's question. Instead, he looked into the mist and frowned. "Why did you lure them into the mist? Are you trying to catch them all?" He smiled coldly and said, "In the past, given my personality, I would have killed those fools as well. Back in the day, I would have gotten rid of those fools as well. What about now?" Grimm smiled leisurely. "Of course it's different now. I've gotten everything I want. I'm confident I can take another step forward. Leave these fools alive. I might have a chance to make use of them in the future. At that, the Lich's scarlet soul fire circled around Grimm's body. As for you, our agreement still stands. For 200 years from now, I'm willing to form an alliance with you and become a member of your family. At their level, although it couldn't be said that their words were the law, every word they said and every oath they made had all kinds of strange power that could cause the power of the law to resonate with them. Even without the help of a magic contract, the moment Songonis said those words, the aura of laws permeated the air. An ancient and obscure thread of fate had already bound him and Grimm together. Neither of them refused, and the strange lines that represented the power of fate and karma entered their bodies, slowly fusing with their souls. Such a contract did not have any punishment. Instead, it was tied to the spiritual power of both parties. If the Lich's spiritual power completely overwhelmed Grimm's, it would be fine even if it violated the contract. However, if Grimm's spiritual power was much higher than his and he violated the contract, the price he would have to pay would be much higher as well. No high-order being would dare to ignore something that involved the origin of the soul. After the contract was established, the relationship between Grimm and the Lich immediately became closer. Although they had yet to reach the level of intimacy, at least they were no longer as cautious as the others, always on guard against each other's sneak attacks. You've done me a great favor. Keep this well. Songonis raised his hand and tossed over a strange heart the size of a millstone. As soon as the heart appeared, the surrounding mist immediately condensed into fine ice shards and began to fall down with a rustling sound. A bone-chilling cold spread in all directions, causing the blood of those who felt it to freeze and their bodies to stiffen. Nax's heart. Grimm almost cried out in shock. The huge heart that was frozen in the thick ice crystal was still pulsating slightly, still maintaining a strong and abundant vitality. The aura of life coming from it was no different from that of Nax the frozen bone dragon. Kakik. I didn't expect that old dragon to be so attached to his past body. He actually dug out the dragon's heart and sealed it in a block of ice before transforming himself. The Lich's upper and lower jaws lightly bumped together, producing a melodious voice. Looks like he planned to find a way to restore his dragon body after the soul transformation. But now, Kakik, all of this has become our spoils of war. Grimm held the huge heart in his hand and used the AI chip to scan its life force and strength. He nodded in satisfaction and stuffed it into his ring of authority. At their level, apart from high-ranked equipment, normal equipment could not be used. Even if they wore low-ranked equipment, they would not be able to increase their strength in the slightest. In addition, when they fought, the powerful power of laws would fill their bodies. These low-ranked equipment could not even withstand the flames infused with the power of laws, much less attack their enemies. They would be incinerated into ashes. Hence, apart from equipment suitable for their level, the rest of the low-ranked treasures would be wasted on them. The frozen dragon's heart was a decent grade 4 material, no matter how one looked at it. Whether it was made into a magic tool or a single-use magic tool, it would definitely be powerful. Grimm accepted the Lich's kindness without any hesitation. What do we do with this plane? Grimm looked up at Congus. The resources and environment here have been severely distorted by the winter's chest. It'll be difficult to restore it to its original state. If you're interested, you can keep it. I don't think those three would dare fight you for it. The Lich could not help but suggest. After saying that, it casually pulled open a small interdimensional teleportation portal. Before he left, he said one last thing. I'll keep my promise. I'll return to the skeletal plane to rest for a while. It'll take about 2 to 3 years. Once things have stabilized, I'll personally pay you a visit. See you then. See you then. After Congus entered the gate, there was a flash of white light, and the space slowly closed up. With such a precious treasure on him, he did not dare to make the long journey. He would rather spend more energy and resources to teleport back to avoid any mishaps along the way. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.